Sometimes the softest stories are the ones the world almost forgot. Long ago, before the kingdoms we remember were drawn on any map, there were lands built of whispers and kings made of dreams. Their names have faded, their crowns turned to dust, and yet their echoes still hum quietly through the air you breathe tonight. And here's the gentle truth. You are safe here. We care about you deeply, and we're glad you found your way to this story. Whoever you are, wherever you are, you belong here with us. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, let your shoulders fall loose, and let's begin our journey. Sometimes the beginning of a story does not arrive with trumpets or banners, but with something quieter, like a breath held for too long, or the way shadows shift at dusk when no one is watching. This story begins in such a place with such a hush. There was once a boy who awoke in a kingdom where silence was not an absence but a presence, thick, golden, and almost alive. The streets were empty of voices, yet if you listened closely, you could hear the faint hum of something forgotten, as though the air itself remembered words long ago spoken. It was not frightening. It was not sad. It was something stranger, peaceful and a little melancholy, the way old lullabies feel when you hum them to yourself without remembering the words. The boy was small then, barefoot, curious-eyed, his hair unkempt like wild grass, his heart already heavy with questions he could not name. He did not remember arriving in this kingdom. He did not remember parents or the shape of a home. What he remembered was only this: the silence seemed to have been waiting for him, as though the stillness had always known he would come. He walked along the stone paths, the kind worn smooth by countless footsteps, though no footsteps fell there now. He ran his fingers over wooden doors that no one opened, pressed his ear to fountains where no water flowed, and sat upon stairways where no one came and went. Every corner of the kingdom carried an echo, and though he could not understand the words, he felt them like warm breath against the skin of his heart. That was when his gift began to show itself. At first, he thought it was nothing more than imagination. A cracked clay cup, lying on its side beneath a window, whispered a lullaby he had never heard before. An old iron key, half buried in dust, hummed like a low bell, vibrating with a song so faint he could almost miss it. Even a torn scrap of cloth seemed to murmur of hands that once stitched it, of shoulders that once carried it through rain. The boy could hear forgotten songs inside broken things. He carried the cup in his small hands, trembling not from fear, but from the tenderness of being trusted with something so delicate. He held it against his ear, as though listening for seashell waves, and the sound deepened. Soft voices, children laughing, a mother singing them into sleep. When he set it down, the voices faded into silence again, but their warmth remained inside him. Day after day, the boy wandered through this empty place, collecting these quiet songs. He learned that every broken object carried memory, not of grandeur or battles or kings, but of small moments, shared bread, laughter by firelight, someone sewing in the hush of night. The boy did not understand why he alone could hear these things, but in his heart he felt that it was not a power for himself. It was a way of keeping company with the silence, and yet even children who walk among mysteries long for companionship. He was not lonely in the way of hunger or pain, but in the way of someone who wishes to share what they see with another. His gift was too strange to hold alone. He wanted to point to a cracked stone, to whisper, "Listen, do you hear it too?" The silence gave him no answer. But silence has its own way of guiding those who trust it. One evening, when the sky was painted with pale lavender and stars hung shy at the horizon, the boy found himself at the edge of the kingdom, where the buildings ended and the land stretched out into wild fields. There, half buried in grass, stood the remnants of a throne. It was not majestic, not golden, not carved with jewels. It was old wood, cracked with age, softened by moss. One arm of it had splintered away. The back leaned slightly, as though it had grown tired of holding itself upright. Yet the moment the boy touched it, his gift bloomed more powerfully than ever before. A voice filled his chest. It was not a voice of words, not a voice of command. It was the soft sigh of someone who had carried great weight and then set it down forever. It was the sound of endings, but also of peace. He pressed his cheek against the wood, and for a moment, tears fell, though he did not know why. The throne remembered a king who no longer existed, The boy could not picture his face, could not know his name. What he felt was deeper than memory. It was legacy, fading yet still alive in the wood. And in that moment, the boy understood something that would guide him for the rest of his life. Nothing is ever entirely gone. Even forgotten kings leave behind songs in the silence. From that night onward, he returned often to the throne. He would sit upon its moss-covered seat, his small legs dangling above the earth, and hum back to it. Sometimes nonsense tunes, sometimes lullabies he invented on the spot. He wanted the throne to know it was not alone in remembering. And though it never answered with words, the wood beneath him seemed warmer each time, as though grateful for his presence. Days became weeks. Though in that kingdom, time was a gentle drift, without markers or urgency. The boy grew taller, his steps more certain, his voice deeper but still touched with wonder. He learned to live inside the silence as though it were a companion, and in that companionship, he began to feel less like a lost child and more like someone meant to be there. And so, the boy who woke in silence became the boy who listened. He became the boy who hummed songs to forgotten thrones, who carried echoes in his heart like precious treasures. He did not yet know that one day his kindness would ripple through other lives, or that entire kingdoms would come to him not for rule, but for remembrance. He did not yet know that his gift was less about hearing songs and more about keeping them alive through love. All he knew was this: silence, when listened to deeply, was not empty at all. It was full of voices waiting to be heard, full of hearts waiting to be remembered. And in that truth, he found his first peace. As he drifted to sleep on the steps of the old throne that night, stars spilled themselves brighter across the sky, as though keeping him company. The silence wrapped him gently, like a blanket tucked by unseen hands, and the kingdom of nothingness hummed softly. As if promising him, "You are not alone here," the boy's days flowed like streams, soft, directionless, carrying him through the still kingdom without demand. He spent them wandering, listening, touching the forgotten things that hummed beneath his hands. Each object told its story in fragments, never in full. A cracked pot whispered of warmth once shared. A chipped flute murmured of children dancing by a fire. Even the dust itself seemed to sigh when stirred, as though longing to rise again in sunlight. He was not afraid of these murmurs. They comforted him, though sometimes they pressed against his chest until it ached with tenderness he could not explain. And yet, as much as the silence held him, he began to wonder if there might be someone, anyone, who could hear what he heard. Someone to tell him he was not imagining things. It was on a morning of pale light, when fog hung low over the streets like breath not yet exhaled, that the boy first saw the elder. She was sitting on the edge of an abandoned fountain, her robes gathered neatly around her feet, her hands resting on her knees. Her hair was silver and long, drifting down her back like moonlight spilled upon stone. Her eyes were closed, but her face was tilted upward as though listening to something in the air. The boy froze, heart quickening because her stillness was not the stillness of emptiness. It was the stillness of someone waiting, someone attuned. He approached without sound. But she spoke before he could say anything. Her voice was soft, like old paper being turned. "You've been listening to the broken things, haven't you?" The boy blinked, astonished. "You can hear them too?" Her eyes opened then, pale and clear, the color of morning mist. She smiled, not in surprise but in recognition, as though she had always known he would find her. "Not as you do," she said. "I cannot hear them sing, but I can feel their weight. Broken things are heavy, child. They carry what was, and they carry what might have been. To touch them with care is to honor all the lives they once served." The boy felt a rush of relief, almost joy. At last, someone who understood, not entirely but enough. He hurried to her side, pulling from his pocket the small clay cup that had first sung to him. He held it out with trembling hands. "Listen," he whispered. "It sings of a family. A mother." Laughter. The elder closed her eyes and placed her hands gently over his, cradling the broken cup. Though no sound touched her ears, she nodded slowly. "Yes, I can feel the warmth of what you mean. You are not mistaken. This gift is yours alone, but it is real." Tears stung the boy's eyes, though he did not fully understand why. Perhaps because he had carried the weight of wonder alone for so long, and now he did not have to. The elder leaned closer, her voice hushed. "Never think brokenness is the end. A cracked vessel still holds memory. A faded song still carries comfort. And you, child, carry them further still." From that day forward, the elder became his quiet guide. She walked with him through the hushed streets, leaning on a staff worn smooth with age. He showed her the hidden places where objects lay half forgotten, the bell tower missing its bell, the marketplace stalls still heavy with shadows of trade, the empty library where books crumbled into dust. He would press his ear to a thing, listening, then describe to her what he heard. She would close her eyes, breathing deeply, and then tell him what it meant. From her he learned not just to listen, but to honor. When he heard laughter in the clay cup, she taught him to bow his head, to thank the ones who had once filled it with water. When he felt sorrow in the broken flute, she told him to hum back gently, offering the comfort of a new song in return. When he touched the throne again, weeping without reason, she explained, "That is the echo of responsibility. Crowns weigh heavier than any stone." The boy began to understand that his gift was not about collecting songs, but about companionship. To hear the voices was to keep them from vanishing. To acknowledge them was to give them peace. Sometimes as they walked, the elder told him stories of her own. She spoke of how, when she was young, the kingdom had been filled with people. She remembered markets bustling with chatter, bells ringing at dawn, lullabies floating from windows at dusk. She spoke of kings and queens who ruled not with armies, but with wisdom, and of how little by little they disappeared. "Where did they go?" the boy asked. The elder shook her head. "Perhaps they faded into dreams. Perhaps they grew weary and turned into clouds. Or perhaps the silence itself carried them away. All I know is this: nothing truly vanishes. It lingers, waiting to be heard." The boy thought about that often. At night, when he lay curled at the base of the throne, he would whisper, "I hear you," to the silence, as though reassuring it. One evening, as the sun lowered and shadows stretched long across the stones, the elder placed her hand on his shoulder. Her touch was steady, grounding. "You must understand, child," she said softly. "Your gift is not for you alone. It is for the world. The broken things sing to you because you are gentle enough to carry them. Someday you will have to share this gentleness with others, even if they do not believe you, even if they cannot hear. That will be your task." The boy looked up at her wide-eyed. "But I am only one person." She smiled, the kind of smile that knows more than words can say. "One person is enough. Sometimes one listener is all a kingdom needs to keep from vanishing entirely." They sat together in the fading light, the boy leaning against the mossy throne, the elder at his side. The silence wrapped around them, thick and golden, yet softer now, like the hush of a lullaby nearing its end. The boy closed his eyes, humming a small tune of his own, and the elder joined, not with voice but with breath, a rhythm that matched his. For the first time, he felt not alone with the silence, but accompanied within it. That night, as he drifted into sleep, he thought of her words. He did not yet understand what task awaited him, or what it meant to carry the songs of broken things into the world. But he knew this. There was wisdom in the elder's eyes, as steady as the moonlight, and he trusted her. The silence seemed to hum in agreement. The days that followed unfolded not in haste, but in the slow rhythm of companionship. The boy and the elder became two figures moving through a quiet kingdom, like lanterns glowing side by side in a long night. Their bond did not need to be named. It grew naturally, the way moss grows on stone or the way rivers carve valleys. Not suddenly, but surely. The boy had never known what it was to have someone steady beside him. He had known the silence, the echoes of forgotten things, the company of objects that hummed their hidden songs. But now he had something warmer. A hand that reached for his when the path grew uneven. A voice that did not mock his strange gift, but honored it. He began to look for objects not only for himself, but for her. When he found a cracked lantern by the steps of an old temple, he brought it to her, eager. "Tell me," he said. Pressing it into her palms, she closed her eyes and breathed in deeply, holding the lantern as though it still carried flame. "I feel night markets," she murmured. Laughter. Lovers walking home, lantern light on their faces. 100 evenings of warmth. "What do you hear?" The boy pressed his ear to the dented metal. Faint hum trembled against him, a melody so soft it felt like memory itself. "I hear footsteps and a child clapping to the rhythm of a song." They looked at one another and smiled, not because they had the same vision, but because they were close enough to touch the same memory from different sides. That was what their bond became. Not identical truths, but shared nearness. The elder carried a pouch with her now, not of food or coin, but of broken things the boy brought. A shard of glass that once belonged to a mirror. A cracked bead that might have been part of a necklace. A piece of tile from a palace floor. She treated each fragment as though it still mattered, wrapping them carefully in cloth. "Why keep them?" the boy asked one day. She answered by setting the shard of mirror against the wall so the sun could strike it. A single ray of light danced across the stones, scattering into colors. "Even broken things shine when placed in light," she said simply. The boy never forgot those words. They began to spend long hours by the throne, sitting together as the boy hummed to the silence, and the elder listened with her patient stillness. Sometimes she would hum with him, her voice low, gravelly but gentle, like the rustle of leaves in wind. Sometimes she would tell him stories of her youth, small stories, ordinary ones, how she once sewed a coat for her younger brother, how she carried water up a hill, how she baked bread on a morning when rain tapped endlessly at the windows. "These are not grand tales," she would say. "They are enough," the boy would reply. For him, they were more than enough. They were proof that even simple lives carried weight, that every moment mattered, even after the people themselves had drifted into silence. One evening, when the sky burned gold and purple, the boy grew bold with his questions. He asked her, "Why do you stay here in this empty kingdom? Why not leave?" The elder smiled faintly, looking at the throne. "Because I am also a broken thing," she said. "And I wish to remain where broken things are remembered kindly." The boy frowned, unsettled. "You are not broken." She looked at him with eyes full of both sorrow and tenderness. "All who live long enough are broken, child. But brokenness is not the end. It is the shape life carves into us. What matters is how we carry it, and who walks beside us as we do." The boy thought long about her words. That night, as he lay curled at the throne's base, he whispered into the silence, "If she is broken, then I will carry her too." Their bond deepened in these quiet promises, spoken and unspoken. One day, the boy found a torn piece of fabric, caught on a tree branch at the kingdom's edge. It was frayed, faded, almost dust. But when he touched it, a rush of images came. Hands sewing in candlelight, laughter of sisters, the weight of shoulders it once covered. Tears filled his eyes. He brought it to the elder, desperate to share. She held it gently, her fingers trembling. "Ah," she whispered. "This was once a cloak. I can almost smell the rain it endured." She pressed it to her cheek, then folded it carefully into her pouch. "See? Even a scrap can carry a whole life." The boy leaned against her then, resting his head on her shoulder. She did not push him away. She let him sit there until the stars rose. For the first time in his life, he felt what it was to belong, not to a kingdom, not to a throne, but to another person. Their days became rituals. Every morning they would walk together, searching for remnants. Every evening they returned to the throne, where the boy hummed songs and the elder breathed beside him. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they said nothing at all. It did not matter. Presence was enough, and yet beneath this peace the boy began to sense something fragile. He noticed the way the elder's steps grew slower, how she leaned more heavily on her staff. He noticed the tiredness in her eyes, the way her hands lingered longer on objects as though savoring them. He felt a quiet fear, though he did not name it yet. One night, unable to sleep, he asked her softly, "Will you stay here with me forever?" The elder looked at him for a long time, her eyes luminous in the moonlight. She brushed his hair from his forehead, her touch gentle. "I will stay as long as I can," she whispered, "and when I cannot, the songs will still be with you." That is the way of all bonds. They outlast us because we give them away. The boy pressed his face into her robe, breathing in the faint scent of herbs and old cloth. And for the first time in many nights he cried, not because he was alone, but because he feared he one day would be. The elder held him until he drifted into sleep, humming a tune he did not know but would remember forever. And so, their bond became not only companionship, but also a lesson. That broken things still carry meaning, that people do too, and that love is not lessened by its fragility. If anything, it is deepened. The silence wrapped around them like a witness, golden and soft. And somewhere, in the empty halls of the forgotten kingdom, the echoes of their bond took root, promising to linger long after both voices were gone. The throne stood deeper in the ruins than the boy had ever walked before. hidden in a hall of crumbling stone where vines draped like curtains. He had seen fragments of it before, an armrest here, a splintered backrest there, but this day, guided by something he could not name, he followed the silence to its heart. The hall smelled of damp earth and age. Dust drifted in shafts of light that spilled through the broken roof, turning the air golden and heavy. Every step the boy took echoed softly, as though he were trespassing into a memory not meant to be disturbed. And there it was, the throne. It was not bright or jeweled. It was not tall or imposing. It was worn, weathered, softened by years of abandonment. Moss grew across its seat, and one leg leaned precariously as though tired from standing upright. The wood bore scars not of battle but of time. Scratches, grooves, places where hands had rested for decades. The boy felt his breath catch. He did not know why, but he felt a gravity there, as if the silence itself bowed around the throne. He reached out, placing a trembling hand upon its arm. The world shifted. It was not sight, not sound, not even memory in the ordinary sense. It was a weight pressing into his chest, filling him with the presence of someone long gone. A sigh deep and weary, a heart heavy with choices, a voice without words saying only, "I was here. I carried more than I could bear. And now I'm gone." The boy gasped, pulling his hand back, but the echo lingered. He staggered, dizzy with it, until a hand steadied him. The elder had followed him quietly, leaning on her staff, her eyes knowing. "You found it," she said gently. The boy looked at her wide-eyed. "There was someone, a king. I felt him," she nodded. This was his seat. He ruled once, though not as you imagine. He was not fierce, not grand. He was only a man who bore the weight of others' lives. And when the time came, the silence took him too. The boy turned back to the throne, swallowing hard. Why is it empty? Shouldn't there be another king? The elder's voice was quiet, almost tender. Not all thrones are meant to be filled forever. Some are meant to remind us that even rulers fade. That power, no matter how heavy, does not last. What remains is not the king himself, but the echo of how he carried his crown. The boy stepped closer again, his fear softening into awe. He brushed his fingers across the moss, listening. This time the hum was gentler, less heavy. He thought he could almost hear laughter under the weight, the trace of someone who had tried to be kind even while burdened. He was tired, the boy whispered, but he loved his people. The elder smiled faintly. "Yes, you hear truly." They sat together before the throne. The boy's legs dangled as he perched upon a stone step, while the elder lowered herself carefully, leaning her staff against her shoulder. The silence pressed around them, thick but not suffocating. It was as though the hall itself was waiting to be honored. After a long while, the elder spoke. "Do you know why I brought you here?" The boy shook his head. "Because you must understand what it means to carry weight. To listen is a kind of carrying. Every story you hear, every song you keep adds to your heart. And as you grow, the weight will grow too. But remember this, weight is not only burden, it is also proof of care. Only those who love deeply are entrusted with such heaviness." The boy lowered his gaze, his chest aching with a feeling too large for words. He thought of the clay cup, the lantern, the scraps of fabric. He thought of the songs that lived inside them, the laughter and sorrow that pressed into him each time he listened. Was that what it meant to carry weight? To keep the fragments alive? "I'm not strong enough," he whispered. The elder placed her hand over his, steady and firm. "Strength is not what is needed. Gentleness is. To be gentle in a world of fading things, that is greater than any strength." Her words sank into him like seeds. They lingered there until dusk, when the last rays of sunlight painted the hall in amber. Shadows stretched across the throne, softening its scars. The boy leaned against the elder's shoulder, half asleep, still listening to the faint hum inside the wood. He wondered then, if one day he too would fade, what echo would remain? Would someone touch the earth where he once sat and feel the warmth of his songs? The thought was not frightening, but oddly comforting. Perhaps that was the gift of the throne. It taught that endings were not voids, but echoes waiting to be carried. Before they left, the elder knelt and placed her palm upon the throne. "Rest well," she whispered. The boy did the same, pressing his cheek to the mossy wood. The hum answered, faint but sure, like a sigh of gratitude. As they walked away, the boy looked back. The throne stood silent, unclaimed, yet it seemed less empty now. It seemed alive, as if relieved to be remembered. That night, when the boy lay curled beside the elder beneath the stars, he whispered into the darkness, "I will not forget you." The silence answered by wrapping him in its golden hush. As though sealing his promise, the boy was no longer quite so small. His legs carried him further, his voice reached further, and his eyes had learned how to rest more deeply upon the world. Still, he followed the elder as faithfully as a shadow follows light. She had become his anchor, his mirror, and his quietest teacher. Her lessons were not carved in books or bound by ink. They were lived, small things threaded into the fabric of days. She showed him how to listen, not just with his ears, but with the hush between heartbeats. She taught him that silence was not emptiness, but soil, that words planted within it could grow into something enduring. But above all, she taught him kindness. At first, he thought kindness was simple: to smile, to share, to speak softly. But the elder shook her head when he offered such answers. "No," she said one evening as they walked the edge of the ruins, the wind combing through her silver hair. "Kindness is not a mood. It is not a decoration you wear when the day is gentle. Kindness is skill. It must be sharpened, practiced, chosen, even when it costs you." The boy frowned, his young brow furrowing. "Chosen? Even when I don't want to?" She nodded. "Especially then." He didn't understand, not fully, but the lesson soon arrived. One morning they passed through a grove where birds were singing in wild, tumbling melodies. The boy skipped ahead, laughing as feathers swirled around him. Then he heard a sharp, broken cry. On the ground lay a bird, its wing bent strangely, its chest rising and falling with uneven breath. The boy froze. His heart lurched with sorrow. "Elder," he called, his voice trembling. "It's hurt." The elder bent down, her eyes grave. She studied the small creature and shook her head. "It may not live." The boy's throat tightened. "But we must help it, please." The elder watched him quietly. "Then help it." His hands shook as he tried to lift the bird, but he fumbled. His grip was clumsy. The bird cried out in pain. Tears blurred his vision. "I can't. I'll hurt it more." The elder's voice was steady. "You will fail sometimes. That is part of kindness. Do not turn away because of failure." The boy wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve, steadying his breath. Slowly, carefully, he tried again. He cupped the bird more gently, using both hands, cradling it against his chest. This time it did not cry out. Together they made a small nest of cloth and leaves where the bird could rest. They gave it water, sang to it, and placed it in the warmth of sunlight. For days the boy tended to it, even when the bird did not stir. Sometimes he wanted to give up. Sometimes he wished he had never found it, so his heart would not ache so much. But the elder's words echoed. Kindness is chosen, especially when it costs you. And so he stayed. The bird never healed enough to fly, but it lived. It perched upon his shoulder and sang broken, crooked songs that were no less beautiful for their imperfection. The boy carried those songs with pride, as if they were medals earned through patience. Another time they passed a well where travelers often came to drink. The boy noticed a stranger leaning against the stones, his canteen empty, his face drawn with hunger. The boy felt pity rise in him, but also fear. The stranger looked harsh, his clothes ragged, his eyes sharp with suspicion. "Elder," he whispered, "what if he hurts us?" The elder's gaze was calm. Perhaps he could. But ask yourself, what do you wish to give this world, fear or kindness? The boy hesitated. His first instinct was to hide, to let the man pass without risk. But then he remembered the bird, and how his fear of failing nearly kept him from saving it. He stepped forward, offering the stranger bread from his satchel. The man took it roughly, muttering without thanks. He turned away, never meeting the boy's eyes. The boy felt stung. "He didn't care," he whispered. "Why did I even try?" The elder's hand rested on his shoulder. "Kindness is not a trade. You do not give to receive. You give because that is who you are. Even if it falls into silence, it still matters." The boy carried those words like a lantern inside him. Over time, kindness became less like an act and more like a craft. The boy learned to measure his tone, to soften his strength, to notice when others carried burdens too heavy for their silence to hold. He grew sharper, not in the way of blades, but in the way of sight, seeing where gentleness was needed, even when no one asked. Yet it was not easy. He failed often. He snapped when tired. He turned away when afraid. He held grudges longer than he should. Each time, shame pressed hard against him. But the elder's voice always returned, patient as the tide. Kindness is not perfection. It is persistence. Slowly he began to see what she meant. Each failure was not proof of weakness, but proof of practice. A stumble in the middle of the path, not the end of it. He began to understand that kindness was not soft at all. It was fierce. Fierce to resist cruelty. Fierce to stay tender in a world that mocked tenderness. Fierce to care when indifference would have been easier. And as he grew, he saw how few wielded this skill. Many carried swords. Few carried gentleness with the same resolve. One evening, beneath a sky scattered with silver stars, he asked the elder, "Is kindness really stronger than a weapon?" She looked at him, her eyes deep as wells. Weapons end lives. Kindness mends them. Which do you think endures longer? Tharm, boy thought of the throne without a king, of the broken bird that still sang, of the bread given without thanks. He thought of how each choice left a mark, not upon stone but upon hearts. He nodded slowly. Kindness lasts, the elder smiled. Then you are learning. That night, as he drifted into sleep, the boy dreamt of carrying a crown made not of gold, but of small glowing lights, each one a kindness chosen. The crown was heavy, but it warmed him. It felt alive. And in the dream he walked not alone, but surrounded by echoes, the bird's crooked song, the elder's patient words, the stranger's unspoken hunger. All of it threaded together into something larger than himself. When he awoke, he did not speak of the dream, but he carried its weight as surely as he carried his satchel, for he knew now the gentlest hands were often the strongest. The boy met him on a morning washed in pale light, when the fields were hushed and the ruins stood like sleeping giants. The wandering child appeared without warning, as if he had always been there, leaning against a crumbled stone, sketching with a stick across the dirt. He was about the same age as the boy, yet different. His eyes carried a glimmer, not of mischief, but of elsewhere, like he lived half inside this world and half in another no one could see. His hair was tangled by wind, his clothes patched by many hands, and at his side hung a small roll of paper tied with twine. "What are you drawing?" the boy asked, curious. The child looked up, smiled faintly, and tapped the ground. In the dust sprawled crooked shapes, mountains bent at impossible angles, rivers that looped back into themselves, and forests that seemed to float above the earth. "A map," the child said, "but not of here. This is the kingdom of falling clouds. You can walk for weeks and never touch the ground." The boy tilted his head. "That place isn't real." The child shrugged, unbothered. "Not yet, but someone has to draw it first." From that moment, the two were nearly inseparable. The boy had always been quiet, shaped by the elder's wisdom and the silence of broken halls. The wandering child was different, restless, always speaking, always sketching new maps on bark, paper, or dirt. Yet their differences braided into something whole. The boy listened, the child imagined. Together, they built worlds. They would sit beside the stream, feet dangling in cool water, while the mapmaker described oceans filled with lanternfish whose light could guide lost sailors back to shore. The boy would close his eyes and almost hear the waves, almost feel the rocking of invisible ships. Other days they wandered through the ruins, the mapmaker unfurling his precious papers. One showed a desert of red glass dunes that sang when the wind passed over them. Another, a forest where trees grew upside down, their roots flowering in the sky. "Don't you see," the child said, his voice glowing with conviction. "These places are real, even if no one has walked them yet. They're waiting." The boy wasn't sure, but he wanted to believe. It was during these days that the boy discovered something new about himself. He had thought his gift was kindness alone, the patience the elder had nurtured in him. But in the company of his friend, his imagination began to stir, like a seed warmed by sunlight. When the mapmaker pointed to a jagged shape and said, "This is the Tower of Endless Bells," the boy would add softly, "and every bell rings a different memory." When the child sketched an island that drifted across the sea like a ship, the boy whispered, It only pauses where someone is lonely. The map-maker's eyes lit up, as if the boy had just opened a secret door in the picture. "See?" the child laughed. "You're a map-maker too. You just don't draw with ink, you draw with words." The boy felt his chest warm. It was the first time he saw himself through another's wonder. Not all their adventures were gentle. Sometimes they argued. The boy, cautious by nature, would say, "But these places can't exist. What's the point of drawing them?" And the map-maker, stubborn as the wind, would flare, "If no one imagines them, how will they ever come true?" The quarrels never lasted long. The boy's quietness softened the child's storms, and the child's laughter mended the boy's doubts. Their friendship was not perfect, but it was alive, like a river, always moving, always shaping new paths. One evening, under a sky painted with violet dusk, the mapmaker unrolled his largest sheet of parchment. The boy gasped. It was covered edge to edge with drawings, kingdoms upon kingdoms, mountains that touched the stars, valleys where light pooled like water, bridges spun of spider silk. But at the very center, surrounded by a circle of gold ink, was something different. A throne. Empty, like the one in the ruins. The boy's chest tightened. "Why is no one sitting there?" The mapmaker's smile faded into something more solemn. "Because I haven't found them yet. The king, or the queen, or whoever belongs there. Maybe they're still being born. Maybe they're still dreaming." The boy touched the parchment softly, tracing the empty seat. He did not speak, but something inside him stirred, a longing, a pull, as if the throne were calling not from the page, but from somewhere deeper. The mapmaker looked at him with curious eyes. "Maybe it's you." The boy laughed nervously. "Me? I don't even know where I'm going." "Exactly," the child replied. "That's how every journey begins." Seasons shifted. Days slowed into the rhythm of shared footsteps and quiet discovery. The elder, watching from afar, said little. She seemed to know that some lessons could only be taught by friendship, not by age. With the mapmaker, the boy learned to trust not only what was, but what could be. He learned that even imagined lands left footprints on the heart. And slowly he realized that their games were not games at all, they were rehearsals for living. Because sometimes when he listened closely, he could almost hear echoes of the boy's invented places within the real world. A tree bent strangely, as if halfway upside down. To a ridge of stone that hummed faintly when the wind passed over it. Tiny reminders that imagination and reality were not enemies, but twins reaching toward one another. One night, while lying side by side on a hilltop, the mapmaker whispered, "Do you think anyone will remember us?" The boy turned his head, puzzled. "Why wouldn't they?" The mapmaker shrugged. "I wander, I don't stay. People forget wanderers, that's why I draw. So even if no one remembers me, the places will." The boy felt something ache in his chest. He reached out, resting his hand gently on the parchment between them. "I'll remember you always." The mapmaker smiled faintly, and for the first time his restless eyes softened. "Then maybe that's enough." The stars spread wide above them, like another map, one drawn not in ink, but in light, and in that stillness the boy understood something he had never known before, that friendship was itself a kingdom, one you could live in forever, even after the maps faded. The boy did not notice his gift at first. Like many true things, it arrived quietly, without a crown or a proclamation. It slipped into him the way dawn slips into night, softly, unnoticed until the shadows have already thinned. It began with a small moment. He was sitting with the mapmaker one afternoon, watching a butterfly rest on the edge of a stone. Its wings rose and fell with delicate rhythm, like the breath of the world itself. The boy blinked, and suddenly the wings slowed, not stopped but slowed, as if the air itself had thickened into honey. He could see every line of color, every trembling vein, every shimmer of light that clung to the wings. The mapmaker laughed, tossing pebbles into the stream, unaware. But for the boy, the butterfly's breath lingered like eternity. And when the world returned to its pace, he found his chest warm with wonder. Days later it happened again. The elder was teaching him how to mend a basket, her hands weaving reeds with patient precision. The boy's fingers stumbled, snapping one strand too tightly. Frustration rose in him like fire. But then the world shifted. Time slowed, stretched outward, giving him space to breathe. He saw the elder's calm eyes, the curve of her smile, the grace in her steady motions. And in that slowed silence his own hands softened. The reed bent but did not break. He exhaled, and time resumed. The elder looked at him with a knowing gaze, though she said nothing. It frightened him, this strangeness. At night he whispered to the mapmaker, "Something's happening to me. Time feels different, like I can hold it, like a thread." The mapmaker grinned as if delighted. "Then hold it. Stretch it like cloth. Make it last." "But what if it's wrong?" the boy asked. "What if I break something?" His friend shrugged. "Everything breaks eventually. Better to stretch it first." The boy smiled, though uneasily. He still wasn't sure if this gift was blessing or burden. He began to practice quietly, when no one was watching. When rain fell, he slowed its rhythm, so each drop gleamed like crystal before touching earth. When the wind passed through tall grass, he lingered in its bending, watching each blade sway like a slow dance. When the elder laughed, he stretched that sound, holding it long enough to notice every crackle, every note, every warmth tucked inside it. It wasn't power in the way stories usually spoke of power. There was no thunder, no blaze, no glory. It was subtle, almost secret, but to the boy it felt like magic more profound than any weapon. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, the boy sat with the mapmaker on a hillside. His friend unrolled another map, sketching fast, hands flying as if the paper might vanish before he finished. "Slow down," the boy whispered. "I can't," the mapmaker replied. "There's too much to draw, too much to imagine." The boy placed a hand gently on the parchment. He breathed, and without meaning to, he stretched the moment. The rush of pencil slowed. The frantic scratching eased. The boy looked up and saw his friend's face, still determined but no longer fevered, no longer chasing time as if it might escape. For a heartbeat that lasted longer than it should, the boy simply saw him. His stubborn eyes, his restless soul, his unspoken loneliness. When time returned, the mapmaker blinked, bewildered. "What did you do?" It felt quiet. "Like I wasn't running anymore." The boy smiled faintly. "Maybe I held the moment still just for us." The mapmaker looked at him in awe, and then in gratitude. But the gift was not only for joy. One afternoon, the boy fell while climbing the ruins, scraping his knee against stone. Pain seared sharp and fast. Instinctively, he stretched the moment. Time slowed, the sting softening into something he could breathe through. He felt each throb not as torment but as rhythm, like a drumbeat reminding him he was alive. Another time the elder spoke of a story that made her eyes glisten with sorrow. The boy, watching, felt her grief weigh the air. Without thinking, he stretched the silence between her words, so she could rest in them without rushing forward. The pause became a shelter, a space where sorrow could exist without drowning her. He realized then that his gift was not for himself alone. It was a way to give others time they did not know how to claim. Yet with each practice, questions bloomed. Was it right to change the rhythm of life? Did stretching time mean stealing it? Was he cheating the natural current? The elder, when he finally confessed, listened without judgment. "Do you think I'm breaking something?" he asked, voice trembling. She touched his hand gently. "You are not breaking. You are listening. Time is not only a river rushing forward. Sometimes it is a pool waiting to be held." Her words rested in him like seeds. He carried them everywhere. The boy grew bolder. He slowed moments of laughter so they rippled like echoes long after they ended. He lingered in sunsets until every cloud seemed to burn with endless fire. He stretched the sound of water dripping in caves, turning it into music. The world, once fleeting, became a place he could savor. He felt richer than kings, not because he owned time, but because he could taste it fully. And yet, beneath the wonder, he sensed a truth. Time, no matter how stretched, would still move forward. He could not stop its march. He could only soften it, hold it gently and let it go. One night, lying awake beside the mapmaker, he whispered, "If I could, I'd stretch this moment forever." "Just us, the stars, and nothing else." The mapmaker yawned, half asleep. "Maybe you already have." The boy looked at him, at the sky scattered with endless light, and felt it, time breathing slower as if listening too, and in that hush, he realized his gift was not about bending the universe. It was about honoring it, about choosing not to rush past beauty, not to flee from pain, not to forget that life was built from moments small enough to lose if one wasn't careful. It was, in truth, another form of kindness. By the time sleep claimed him, the boy no longer feared his gift. He carried it softly, like a lullaby only he could hum. And as he drifted into dreams, he stretched the moment one last time, long enough to whisper to himself, "Remember this. Remember how it feels to belong here just now." The stars blinked, the night deepened, and somewhere, time exhaled with him. The elder had always seemed endless. She was steady as stone, constant as the moon. Her presence filled the ruins with warmth. Her patience stretched through every season. Her voice lingered in the boy's heart even when she was silent. He had begun to believe she would always be there. But nothing stays forever. It began quietly. She walked slower, paused more often, gazed longer at the horizon as though listening to something only she could hear. The boy noticed but said nothing. He thought perhaps it was age or weariness or the heaviness of carrying so much wisdom. He told himself that dawns always returned, that nothing truly vanished, until the morning when he awoke to find her place empty. The basket she had been weaving was left unfinished. Her cloak hung where it always did, but she was gone. No trail, no sound, no farewell. Just absence, thin, sharp, unbearable. The boy's chest tightened. His breath came fast, shallow. He searched the ruins, calling her name into every hollow arch and broken hall. No answer. He ran to the fields, to the stream, to the hill where they had sat countless evenings. Empty, empty, empty. Panic clawed at him. "She wouldn't leave," he whispered. She wouldn't. But the sky was silent and the world offered no reply. The mapmaker found him wandering, eyes wet, voice hoarse. "She's gone," the boy choked. "Maybe she's only traveling," the mapmaker offered gently. "Wanderers go where the wind calls," but the boy shook his head. He knew this was not a journey. It was an ending. That night he lay awake, clutching the elder's cloak, inhaling the faint trace of her, her scent of reeds, smoke, and river water. He wept quietly, not the wild sobs of a child, but the aching grief of someone who had tasted love and could not bear its absence. He stretched time, desperate, trying to slow the night, to hold on to the last hours where she might still return. But time slipped through his hands like sand. Even his gift could not bind her to him. In the days that followed, the boy felt the ruins heavier than before. Every stone seemed to echo her absence. Every silence carried the shape of her missing voice. He tried to remember her as she had been, guiding his hands over broken reeds, speaking softly of persistence, telling him that kindness was skill. But memory hurt. Each thought was sharp, cutting him with what he could not have again. "Why does it ache so much?" he asked the mapmaker. His friend looked at him with sadness older than his years. "Because you loved her. And love doesn't vanish when people do. It stays. Sometimes it stays louder than their voice ever was." The boy sat with those words heavy in his chest. One morning he climbed the hill where he and the elder had often watched dawn. The mist was thick, rolling across the grass in pale ribbons. He sat there until the sun rose, burning slowly through the fog, dissolving it into nothing, and suddenly he understood. She had not vanished. She had drifted like mist at dawn, dispersed but not gone. Part of her had seeped into the sky, into the earth, into the boy himself. Every kindness he offered was her hand guiding his. Every moment he stretched was her patience lingering in him. Every word he spoke softly was her echo continuing. She had left, yes, but she had not ended. That night, he sat by the stream, cloak wrapped around him, and whispered into the water, "Thank you." The stream carried his words away, as if delivering them to wherever she had gone. For the first time since her leaving, his chest loosened. He felt sorrow still, but not as a storm, more as a tide, steady, endless, carrying him forward. The boy did not stop missing her. He never would. But he began to live differently. When the mapmaker grew restless, snapping in frustration, the boy slowed time and offered patience as the elder had once given him. When strangers passed by weary and hungry, he shared bread even when thanks did not come, just as she had taught him. When silence stretched too long, he no longer feared it. He listened because she had shown him silence was fertile. Loss, he realized, was not emptiness. It was inheritance, Sometimes on misty mornings he would wake and swear he felt her presence again. Not seen, not heard, but felt, like a hand resting lightly on his shoulder, like breath against his cheek. In those moments he closed his eyes, stretched the moment wide and let it hold him. The ache never vanished, but it softened into something almost beautiful. A reminder, a tether, a proof of love, and so the boy walked forward, carrying her absence as one carries a lantern. Heavy, yes, but shining, for even mist at dawn leaves behind light. The boy had walked far, guided by nothing more than the pull of silence. For days the world seemed stretched thin, as if time itself were weary. Grass bent under his feet, rivers curved away from his path, winds hushed whenever he paused. Something unseen was drawing him forward. Then one evening he crested a ridge and saw it, a kingdom that should have been alive but was instead utterly still. The walls were crumbled, the towers hollow. No smoke curled from chimneys, no carts rolled through streets, no voices lifted across courtyards. Yet the place was not ruined like the elders' ruins. It looked as though the people had only just left, as though doors had been shut softly, windows closed with care, fires extinguished without haste. A hush lay heavy over everything. Not death, not disaster, just absence. The boy stepped into the streets. Dust stirred under his boots, but no one came. He searched for signs of life, a footprint, a cooking pot left warm, a child's toy forgotten in haste. But everything was arranged neatly, carefully. It was as though the entire kingdom had tidied itself and then simply vanished. And then he heard it, faint, drifting on the air, almost too soft to be real, a lullaby. It came from no direction and every direction. The sound of children being soothed, of mothers rocking infants, of voices humming the same melody in hundreds of homes, yet there were no homes left filled with breath, only empty spaces echoing with what once was. The boy stopped still, heart trembling. He listened. The song was simple, but in its simplicity carried an ocean, a rise, a fall, a gentle pause like waves on shore, like breath in sleep. The tune wrapped around him like a cloak, and for a moment he could almost see them. Children curled in beds, fingers wrapped around blankets, parents with weary eyes but tender smiles, singing softly into the dark, families leaning close, carrying one another through night. The boy closed his eyes and felt tears prick. It was not sorrow alone. It was beauty so fragile that it hurt. He wandered deeper into the kingdom, and everywhere the song followed. Through market squares and echoing halls, across bridges and beneath silent towers. Each step seemed to awaken another note, another harmony, until the entire empty city was alive with a choir of memory. He stretched time, desperate to hold on to the sound. He slowed the moment until it draped thick around him, every note suspended in amber. But even stretched, the lullaby began to fade. Its threads unraveled one by one, until he could only grasp fragments. "No," he whispered, "stay." But memory is not bound by will. The last notes drifted away, leaving the kingdom silent again. The boy sat on the steps of an abandoned hall and wept. He had lost his elder to the mist, but now he was losing an entire people he had never even known. What was crueler, that they had gone without warning, or that all they had left behind was a song too fragile to hold? His mapmaker friend sat beside him. "Why does it feel like they are still here?" the boy asked. "Because they are," the mapmaker said. "Not in flesh, not in stone, but in song. Sometimes the only thing that survives is the way people sang to one another." The boy turned these words in his heart. He realized kingdoms were not built only of walls and crowns. They were built of voices, of the ways people soothed their children, comforted their weary, whispered their hopes in the dark. Perhaps that was why the lullabies lingered when everything else had vanished. That night, he lay in one of the abandoned homes. The bed was neatly made, the room bare, but he swore he felt warmth pressed into the walls. He curled up and, trembling, began to hum the lullaby he had heard. His voice was thin, unsure, but it filled the space, and as he sang he felt less alone. The elder's patience was still inside him. The mapmaker's curiosity was beside him. And now the lullabies of a forgotten kingdom joined them, soft and steady. For the first time he understood that memory was not just remembering, it was repeating, carrying forward, adding his voice to theirs. Days passed, and he remained in the empty kingdom. He explored its corners, humming the lullaby in every street and hall as if to keep the memory alive. He carved the melody into stone with chalk, traced its rhythm into the dirt, sang it to the wind until the hills beyond could carry it farther. He knew he could not bring the people back, but he could keep their song alive. When at last he left, he looked back once. The towers still stood, quiet and watching, and though the air was silent, he carried the lullabies in his chest. As he walked onward, he whispered to himself, "Even a forgotten kingdom leaves behind a song." Even silence remembers, and the road ahead did not feel quite as empty. The boy left the kingdom of lullabies with the song still tucked in his chest. It played softly when he walked, as if his steps beat the rhythm, as if the earth itself was humming with him. And yet a heaviness followed too, the knowledge that whole worlds could vanish, leaving only whispers behind. After many days of travel, he reached a valley he had seen in dreams. At its heart was a hall built not of stone, but of smooth wood and woven vines. It rose as though grown from the land itself, doors tall as trees, windows wide as sky. Lanterns glowed faintly within, though no smoke rose from the roof. Villagers were gathered outside, their faces turned expectantly as the boy approached. They looked at him with a mixture of hope and weariness, as if they had been waiting for him without knowing his name. One of the elders stepped forward, a woman with hair silver as frost and eyes dark as soil. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "We have no ruler," she said. "The throne has been empty for longer than memory. But when you came down the mountain, the wind shifted. The river quieted. We think you are the one who was meant to lead." The boy froze. Him, a king. He remembered the ruins he had found, the lullabies that lingered, the emptiness left behind. He thought of crowns, how heavy they must be, how fragile. He thought of thrones, how lonely they looked when no one remained to sit upon them. And most of all, he thought of silence. The silence that had taught him more than words ever had. That night they led him into the hall of woven wood. At its center was a throne unlike any other, not golden or jeweled, but carved simply, polished smooth by countless hands that had once touched it. It looked less like a seat of power, more like a chair waiting for a weary traveler. The boy stood before it. His heart pounded. "You are meant to rule," the elder said softly. "You hear what others cannot. You carry songs no one else remembers. You can guide us." The boy placed a hand on the arm of the throne. For a moment he felt the weight of the people's longing. They wanted a figure to believe in, a voice to follow, a steady hand to hold their scattered lives together. But when he closed his eyes, he did not see himself upon that throne. He saw the elder who had taught him that broken things still carried meaning. He saw the mapmaker child sketching lands that could never be reached. He saw the empty kingdom filled with lullabies, not kings, and he heard the river outside, carrying voices downstream, each one blending, each one flowing into the next. He knew then he was not meant to rule. The boy turned to the people. His voice was soft, but it carried, as though silence itself was lending him strength. "I cannot be your king," he said. "A throne separates. A crown weighs heavy. But if you wish, I can listen. I can sit among you, hear your stories, and remember them. Not as a ruler, but as a companion," the crowd murmured, uneasy at first. The king was easy to understand. "Hey, listener, what kind of leader was that?" But the boy continued. "Kingdoms vanish. Thrones crumble. Crowns are forgotten. But the words spoken to one another, they remain. A lullaby can outlive a king. A story can outlast a wall. If I can be anything, let me be the one who keeps listening, so none of you are ever forgotten." His eyes shone with quiet certainty. The elder with silver hair bowed her head, and slowly others followed. Not in surrender, but in respect. Perhaps a listener was what they had needed all along, and so instead of taking the throne, the boy sat among the villagers that night. One by one they came to him. A farmer spoke of his fields, how the soil no longer held seeds as it once had. A child whispered her dreams of places beyond the valley, places no map yet held. A widow spoke of her husband, gone many winters ago but still felt in every corner of her home. The boy did not offer answers, nor did he command. He simply listened, eyes soft, hands folded. And as he listened, something remarkable happened. Their voices grew steadier, their shoulders straightened. Their burdens lightened, as though being heard was a kind of healing. By dawn, the hall of woven wood was filled not with decrees, but with stories. And when the sun rose, the people walked away not with a ruler, but with a listener whose presence made them feel less alone. In the days that followed, the boy became a quiet fixture in the valley. He wandered its paths, sat by the river, listened to the wind. When people spoke, he gave them not solutions but his full presence. He let their words echo, linger, take root. He realized that listening was its own form of power, a softer one, invisible yet enduring. It bound people together in ways laws never could. And each night as he lay down to sleep, he hummed the lullaby of the vanished kingdom, weaving it with the new voices he had heard. The song grew richer, layered with memory, a chorus that would not be forgotten. One evening the elder approached him again. She looked at him long as though studying not his face but the silence around him. "You were right," she said quietly. "We needed someone to listen. That is a kind of kingship, though not the kind carved in wood or gold. You are not a ruler, but you are a keeper." The boy bowed his head. He felt no pride, only a deep stillness inside, like a lake unbroken by wind. He knew then that his path was set. He would not wear crowns, he would not sit on thrones. He would carry voices, lullabies, whispers. He would walk the forgotten roads and ensure that no story was entirely lost to silence. As he left the valley, the people did not call after him to stay. They simply watched, humming softly to themselves the lullaby he had given back to them. And for the first time, the boy realized that listening had given them their own voices again. The throne remained empty, but the village did not feel leaderless. For they had remembered something truer than rule. They had remembered each other. And the boy walked on, lighter than before. He carried no crown, no title. Only silence. Only songs. Only listening. The boy had left the valley behind, the throne unclaimed and the stories gathered into his heart. His path curved through low hills, fields breathing with wildflowers, and long quiet stretches of silence where only the wind kept him company. But one afternoon the silence shifted. Ahead, through the tall grass, he heard a low murmur, soft and steady, deeper than mere wind. As he drew closer, the sound grew into something vast, like voices overlapping endlessly, woven into one continuous song. It was not music exactly, not speech, but a layered chorus of countless tones, high, low, broken, tender, all flowing together. And then he saw it, a river, wide and slow, moving like glass across the land. It shimmered strangely, its surface trembling with colors that did not belong to sunlight alone. The water seemed alive with shadows and glimmers, shapes that almost looked like footsteps pressing and fading, voices rising and dissolving. The boy knelt at the bank and touched the water. A ripple spread outward, and as it did, a whisper rose in his ears. It was a voice, clear, faint, ancient. "Here I walked. Here I loved. Here I left." He gasped and pulled back. The water stilled, yet his heart thudded with wonder. This was no ordinary river. This was a keeper. He leaned close again, letting his fingers trail the surface. 1,000 whispers rose at once, too many to follow. Like pages of a book fluttering wildly in the wind, he closed his eyes, focused, and slowed time. The river seemed to stretch, each ripple pausing, each voice slowing until one voice came forward. It belonged to a child. "I chased a dog here. I fell, I laughed, I got wet. My mother lifted me up." The boy smiled, the memory filling him with warmth not his own. He let the water flow again, and another voice rose, this one old, worn, heavy with years. "I sat by this bank with her. We watched the water. We spoke of nothing, but it was everything." The boy's chest tightened. The river remembered not only footsteps, but the very weight of presence, the feelings carried in moments that might otherwise vanish. He realized every soul who had walked here, every heart that had touched this place, had been gathered by the river. Their footsteps were etched into the current. Their voices carried forever. The boy spent hours by the bank, listening. He heard lovers whispering promises they never kept. He heard children splashing, their laughter echoing like bells. He heard wanderers resting, their weary sighs blending with the current. He heard the cries of grief, the bursts of joy, the silence of those who simply sat and breathed. It overwhelmed him. The river was not water. It was memory itself, flowing endlessly forward, yet never forgetting what had passed. As the sun began to sink, the boy stood and walked along the bank. With each step, voices rose beneath his feet. Some spoke in languages he did not know, yet their tones told him enough. Longing, tenderness, sorrow, peace. He slowed his pace, afraid to step too quickly. afraid he might crush the delicate layers of lives remembered here. But the river never faltered. It welcomed every step, folding his presence into its vast chorus. At a bend in the river, he found a stone worn smooth by countless years of sitting. He lowered himself onto it, gazing into the water. Shadows drifted by, shapes of feet, hands, faces, some so faint he could barely make them out, and then suddenly one shape held, a pair of hands, cupped gently in the water. An elder's voice rose, soft and clear, like a memory brought forward just for him. Even broken things carry meaning. The boy's breath caught. It was his elder, the one who had vanished into mist. The river remembered him. Tears filled the boy's eyes. He leaned forward, listening harder, but the voice faded back into the current, mingling with the others. Still, it had been enough. His elder was not gone, not completely. The river carried him. The river carried everything. That night the boy camped beside the water. He could not sleep. Instead he lay awake, listening to the murmurs rising and falling. They came in waves, like dreams spilling into one another. He realized something then, something he had not understood in the silent kingdom or in the valley where he had refused the throne. To listen was not just to hear the living, it was also to hear the past, to give space not only to voices still speaking, but to those who had long since fallen quiet. The boy promised himself he would not let these voices dissolve into nothing. He would carry them. He would hum their notes, remember their words, weave their lives into the lullabies he already held. He was not a king, but perhaps he was something else, something gentler. A river walker, a keeper of echoes. When dawn came, he rose and stepped into the water. It was cold but not unkind. Each ripple kissed his ankles, each current wrapped around him as if in recognition. Voices stirred, curious, welcoming him into their endless procession. He walked across slowly, reverently. Each step he took, the river answered with a whisper. Some he understood, some he didn't, but all of them folded into him, leaving impressions like soft footprints across his heart. By the time he reached the far bank, he knew he had left something of himself behind, too. His steps would now live within the river. His voice, his presence, his promise to listen, they would join the chorus. He looked back once. The river flowed on, eternal, filled with memories stretching far beyond his sight. And for the first time, he did not fear being forgotten, for even if kingdoms fell, even if names crumbled, the river would remember. He whispered into the morning air, "Let me always be like you. Let me carry every voice, let me flow forward, but never forget." The river glimmered as if answering, and so the boy turned, the water at his back, the path ahead wide and waiting. His heart was fuller, heavier, but in a way that made him strong. He walked on, listening still. The boy had walked many days beyond the river, carrying with him the weight of voices and the lightness of lullabies. His path led him through meadows where flowers tilted as though listening, through forests where every tree seemed to whisper, through nights where stars bent lower than usual, as if curious about his journey. And then, one evening, he reached a village unlike any he had seen before. The houses were small, built from pale stone, and each window glowed faintly with a bluish light that reminded him of moonlight reflected on water. The air was soft with the smell of lavender and wood smoke. People moved quietly, not hurried, not restless, as if they were half dreaming even while awake. He felt their eyes on him, not suspicious but curious, like they already knew he was carrying pieces of places long forgotten. They led him, without words, to the edge of the village. There, under a great willow tree, sat a woman with dark hair that pooled around her shoulders like night itself. Her eyes were closed, but she seemed alert, listening in ways deeper than sight. The boy greeted her softly, but she did not respond, and then, when he blinked, he was no longer standing in the village at all. He was standing in a dream. The meadow stretched endless, its grasses tall and golden. The sky swirled with colors not found in waking life, violet, green, silver, all moving together like living silk. And in front of him stood the woman. Her eyes were open now, clear as glass, reflecting more than they revealed. Her lips did not move, but her voice brushed his mind like a feather. "You've come far, listener." The boy's breath caught. He knew at once this was not imagination, not his own dreaming. This was her voice, her way of speaking. She did not shape sound. She shaped dream. He answered aloud, but his words felt heavy, clumsy. Still, she seemed to hear him. "I've been listening," he said, "to rivers, to lullabies, to silence. But I've never listened like this." Her gaze softened. "Dreams are another river. They carry what waking cannot." The boy looked around. Every step he took sent ripples through the dream grass, and with each ripple, fragments of memory rose. He saw the elder's face, the mapmaker child's drawings, the vanished kingdom's lullabies. They drifted around him like lanterns, glowing and then fading. "You can see them," he whispered. She nodded. "I see what your heart carries. I speak with what mine carries. This is how I have always lived. The world outside is too loud, too blunt. Here in the space between sleep and waking I can say everything." The boy felt wonder stir in him, deep and tender. "Then I will listen here too." And so they sat together in the dream meadow. She shared fragments of herself, not in neat stories but in images. A childhood of wandering through forests where birds taught her their songs. Nights spent lying on rooftops, staring at stars until they slipped into her dreams. The loneliness of being unable to speak in the way others expected. And the peace she had found when she realized she could still be heard if someone cared to listen differently. The boy did not interrupt. He let the images flow, let the feelings wash through him like water. And when his turn came, he offered her the lullaby he carried, not by humming it aloud, but by letting the melody form inside the dream. She closed her eyes and he knew she heard it perfectly. For days he stayed in the village. By daylight he walked its streets, learning the gentle rhythm of its people. At night he returned to her under the willow, and together they stepped into dreams. Sometimes their dreamscapes were vast, oceans where the waves whispered, mountains that breathed like sleeping giants. Sometimes they were small, an empty room filled only with light or a bench beside a river that remembered footsteps. They did not need many words. The silence between them was enough, and in that silence the boy discovered something new. A bond that was not about teaching or guiding, not about maps or kingdoms, but about simply being seen. She understood his heart without him having to explain. And he understood hers, carried not in words but in the weight of her gaze, the way her dreams bent gently toward him. One night, she showed him something deeper. The dream opened into a vast sky of stars. Each star pulsed with a soft glow, and when he drew near, he realized each one was a person's unspoken thought, wishes never spoken aloud, fears never confessed, hopes too fragile to share. She lifted her hand, and a star drifted down. It pulsed in her palm, flickering like a heartbeat. "This is what I hear," she said. "What others do not say. The hidden songs of their hearts. They flow through me even when I sleep." The boy gazed at the star, trembling. "Doesn't it hurt to carry so much?" Her expression grew quiet, wistful. "It is heavy. But it is also beautiful. To know what people never dare to voice, it means they are never truly alone." The boy thought of himself walking through vanished kingdoms, carrying echoes and lullabies. And for the first time he felt less solitary. He realized she too was a keeper, though her keeping was different, rooted in dreams rather than rivers. When he finally told her he must leave, her eyes, those clear, dreaming eyes, rested on him with no sadness, only understanding. "We will meet again in dreams," she said. "No matter where you go, you will find me there." The boy bowed his head. "And I will listen even then." That night, his last in the village, he dreamt again of the meadow. She stood in the tall grass, the sky rippling with colors. She placed a hand over his chest where the lullaby still lived, and whispered, "Carry them softly. Carry me softly too." When he woke, the willow tree swayed in morning light. She was gone from its roots, but he knew she had not vanished. She had simply stepped back into the river of dreams. The boy walked onward, but now, at the edges of sleep, he felt her presence. And in the quiet of his journey, he began to hum not only lullabies of forgotten kingdoms, but also the unspoken songs of those who spoke in dreams. He did not need to understand it all. Listening was enough. The boy walked on from the willow village, but he did not walk alone. Even though her figure was no longer at his side, her presence lingered at the edges of every thought, like a low hum beneath the silence. When night fell and his eyes grew heavy, she was there in the space between waking and sleep, waiting, patient, steady as the tide. The first time he dreamed after leaving, He found himself standing at the threshold of a house he had never seen. Its windows glowed with warm amber light, and inside he could hear faint laughter. Laughter that belonged to no one he had ever met. He hesitated, unsure if he was intruding, but then the door opened and she was there, her face lit by the fire's glow. She did not speak with words, only with a smile that said, "You've arrived and that is enough," and so began their strange companionship. By day, the boy wandered farther into forgotten lands. He walked through ruins where ivy clung stubbornly to stone walls, as though unwilling to let memory crumble completely. He traced paths along cliffs where the ocean thundered below, each wave carrying fragments of the world's oldest songs. By night, he returned to her. They met not always in the same place. Sometimes it was the meadow of tall dream grass. Other times it was a forest with leaves of glass, each one chiming when touched. Once they sat together in a boat that drifted down a river of starlight. The current slow and kind. Each dream felt like a new room in the same house, a house without walls, yet one they both belonged to. Their bond was not like the boy's friendship with the map-making child, who filled silence with drawings and laughter. Nor was it like the guiding warmth of his elder, who had once shown him how broken things still carry meaning. And it was not like the ache he felt for the vanished kingdom, whose lullabies still hummed in his chest. This was different. It was quieter, deeper, a presence that did not demand, did not teach, did not ask for return. It simply was, and that was enough. In one dream, she asked him nothing at all. They sat side by side on a hill, the sky above unfolding with constellations that shifted and reshaped into unfamiliar figures, creatures with wings of fire, rivers coiled into dragons, trees that reached their branches across galaxies. He did not feel the need to name them, and she did not either. Their silence was a shared language. In another dream, she opened her hand and let him see fragments of her memories. He saw her as a child, wandering barefoot through rain-soaked fields. He saw her lying awake at night, listening to her village's voices but unable to speak back. He saw her learning to shape her first dream, trembling with wonder and fear. She showed him not as a storyteller might, with order and conclusion, but as a river does, meandering, endless, incomplete, yet alive, and in return, the boy let her see him. He opened the chest of his heart and let spill the lullabies, the laughter of the map-maker child, the silence of the elder's hands mending broken things, the haunting emptiness of the vanished kingdom. She listened. She always listened, and somehow in the act of being listened to, he felt lighter. But what was this bond? He tried to name it once. Is this friendship? He asked her in a dream of mirrors, where each reflection showed a different version of himself, smiling, crying, silent, singing. She shook her head gently. Not friendship, love then? Her gaze softened, not in denial, but in something gentler. Not love either. Then what? She reached out, pressed her fingertip to the surface of one mirror. The reflection rippled, and suddenly the boy saw himself not alone but sitting beside her, the two of them blurred into one outline. Something softer, she said. Something unnamed. And that was enough. Days passed, weeks perhaps, though in the timeless weave of his journey the boy no longer counted. He noticed changes in himself. His listening deepened. He could now hear not just the voices of rivers and lullabies, but the unspoken sigh of wind through ruins, the hush of grass bowing under his feet, the secret heartbeats of sleeping animals. Even in waking, her presence seemed to sharpen his senses. The dream-speaking woman had given him new ears, ears tuned not to sound but to silence. He realized this bond had become part of his power. She was not teaching him, not shaping him, but simply by being, she had given him a way of listening beyond sound and time. One night, they walked through a dream city. The streets were paved with stone that glowed faintly, each step leaving an imprint of light. As they walked, he realized the city was built entirely from their shared memories, his lullabies echoing from open windows, her dream rivers flowing through canals. He stopped in wonder. Is this ours? She nodded. A place made only because we both remember. It cannot exist alone. It is born between us. The boy felt something stir in his chest, an ache, a warmth, both at once. He thought, perhaps this is what kingdoms are meant to be. Not stone walls or thrones, but the space between two beings where silence itself becomes shelter. They never promised each other forever. They did not need to. He knew one day she might drift like mist at dawn, just as his elder had. He knew dreams are fragile, slippery, prone to unraveling, and yet that did not make their bond less real. In fact, it made it more precious. Each night with her was a lantern, bright for a moment before fading. And he carried those lanterns carefully, stringing them inside his heart like stars. When the boy woke from one such dream, he sat beneath a tree in the waking world, mourning birds calling above. For the first time he wept, not from grief but from fullness. He realized he had found something beyond naming, not love, not friendship, something softer, something unnamed, and in its quiet he felt at peace. The boy came upon the bell tower by accident. It stood on the edge of a forgotten village, a spire leaning sideways, its stones cracked and worn. Ivy wrapped itself around the tower like a patient hand, holding something frail. No bells rang from its crown. No voices sang in its shadow, only silence. He paused at the base, tilting his head. Even silence has a voice, and he listened closely. He could hear the faintest tremble in the air, as if the tower still longed to sing but had forgotten how. A storm gathered on the horizon, dark clouds rolling low, muttering. The wind pulled at his sleeves. Yet beneath the thunder, he swore he could hear something. An old broken chime, faint as a breath. He placed his hand on the stone. It was cold, tired, but not empty. The villagers who remained, few and quiet, watched him from doorways. Their faces carried the kind of resignation that grows when storms never stop. The boy asked them gently, "What happened here?" An elder woman, her back bent like a willow branch, stepped forward. "The tower once rang to calm the skies," she whispered. "Its bells carried peace into the storms, but the bells broke long ago and the tower with them. Since then the storms grow restless, louder each season." Her voice was not bitter, just weary, like waves rolling endlessly against a shore. The boy nodded, saying nothing more. He understood. Broken things still carried meaning. He had learned this once before, and he would not forget. So he stayed. At dawn he climbed the tower. The stairs spiraled upward, each stone chipped, worn smooth by years of wind. At the top, he found the great beams where bells had once hung. Rusted chains dangled, swaying slightly. Fragments of bronze lay scattered on the floor, cracked into dull silence. The boy touched one fragment. The moment his fingers brushed the metal, the storm outside shifted. A low rumble softened, like thunder sighing. He closed his eyes and listened deeply. The bell piece still remembered, not its shape, not its perfection, but the song it had once carried. He spent days gathering the fragments. The villagers watched as he searched through grass, soil, even riverbanks, pulling broken shards of bronze back to the tower. Some pieces were jagged, some bent, none whole. At first the villagers doubted. "What good are shards?" they murmured, but the boy only smiled softly. He knew. Broken things could sing if you listened long enough. Night by night he dreamt of the bell whole. In his dreams, the woman of silence sometimes appeared, standing beside him. She said nothing, only placed her hand on the fractured metal as if to remind him that sound is born not from perfection, but from patience. When the final shard was found, the boy began to mend. He had no hammer, no forge, no fire. Instead, he used something quieter. He listened. Piece by piece, he pressed the fragments together, and the cracks hummed faintly, answering his touch. The bronze, remembering itself, grew warm beneath his hands. Slowly, gently, the bell stitched itself, not into what it had been, but into something new. When the villagers saw it, they gasped. It was not flawless. The bell bore lines like rivers across its surface, scars that caught the light. But it was whole enough to hang once more. Together they lifted the bell and placed it back upon the beam. The boy climbed beside it and held the rope. The storm had grown fierce by then, clouds boiling, winds shrieking through the cracks of homes. The villagers gathered below, clutching shawls and cloaks, fear flickering in their eyes. The boy looked at them, then at the bell. He breathed in, slowly, deeply, as though filling himself with every kindness he had ever known. Then he pulled the rope. The sound rang out, not sharp, not perfect. It trembled, cracked, wandered. And yet it was beautiful. The bell sang like a voice that had broken but still chose to sing. Each note carried not flaw, but truth. The storm paused. Clouds slowed their tumbling. The wind softened like a hand unclenching. The rain that had begun to fall stilled into mist. The villagers lifted their heads, eyes wide. The boy rang the bell again and again, each tone weaving calm into the sky. The storm, listening, breathed deeply and fell quiet. That night, the village was filled with a peace it had not known for years. Families lit candles in their windows. Children slept without trembling at thunder. The air itself felt gentler, as if it too had learned how to rest. The elder woman approached the boy. Her hands, wrinkled and trembling, pressed into his. "You have given us back our sky," she whispered, but the boy shook his head softly. The bell was never gone. It only needed someone to listen. In the nights that followed, the boy stayed to ring the bell whenever storms rose. Each time the notes wove through the clouds, calming their rage. And each time he noticed something new. The bell was not only calming storms outside, but also storms within. The villagers' voices grew lighter. Laughter returned to their gatherings. Songs crept back into evenings. The cracks of the bell had become lines of strength, each one carrying a note of resilience. The boy himself felt it too. Each time he rang the bell, he felt his own storms. Loneliness, loss, unanswered questions. Settle just a little. One evening, he stood alone at the tower's top, watching the sunset melt into the horizon. The bell glowed golden in the fading light, its scars gleaming like rivers of fire. He thought of his elder who had once taught him that broken things still carry meaning. He thought of the woman of silence, who showed him bonds softer than naming. He thought of kingdoms vanished, lullabies lingering, and he understood. The bell was not merely an instrument. It was a mirror. It showed him that wholeness is not the absence of cracks, but the courage to sing through them. The storms would always come. That much he knew. But so would the sound of the bell, trembling yet steady, carrying peace into restless skies. And that was enough. The boy had grown used to walking through ruins, but this place was different. He had come to the edge of a wide meadow, where tall grass bent in a steady breeze, each blade shimmering in late afternoon light. From a distance, the meadow looked ordinary, an endless quilt of green stitched with wildflowers. But as he stepped closer, he felt it before he heard it. The meadow was humming. Not with insects, not with wind, not with birds. It was humming with voices, low and steady. The sound trembled like a choir without words, a song stretched thin by time but still alive. The boy paused in awe, his chest tightening. Each note seemed to know him, to reach toward him. He closed his eyes, and the hum filled him with something at once comforting and sorrowful, like being held and left behind all at once. Long ago, he learned from a wandering elder that kingdoms could be forgotten not by falling in fire or ruin, but by gently dissolving, slipping so slowly from memory that one day no one spoke their names, and now he realized he was standing on such a place. The meadow was no ordinary field. It was the resting ground of a kingdom faded from time. Where walls had once stood, only grass swayed. Where streets had crossed, wildflowers bloomed. Where laughter once echoed, the hum remained, carrying every voice that had ever lived there. The boy knelt and touched the soil. It felt warm, alive. Beneath his fingers, he thought he felt the pulse of footsteps long gone. That evening he built a small fire and sat alone in the meadow. The hum never stopped. It rose and fell like breathing, steady as a tide. At times it grew louder, swelling like a choir of thousands. At other times it softened, fading into almost silence. As he listened, images flickered in his mind, children running through courtyards, women weaving cloth at windows, men shaping tools in firelight. None of these were his memories, yet they came to him as if the meadow itself wished him to remember. And though he was alone, he did not feel lonely, for every voice that had once belonged to this kingdom still lingered, woven into the air like invisible threads. The boy walked deeper into the meadow the next day. The hum shifted as he moved, as if guiding him. He followed until he reached the heart of the field, where the grass bent into a perfect circle, untouched by flower or weed. Here the hum swelled louder than anywhere else. He sat cross-legged and closed his eyes. The voices rose. He heard lullabies sung by mothers long gone. He heard stories told by grandparents in the quiet before sleep. He heard laughter ringing across feasts, tears shed at goodbyes, whispers shared in secret corners. Each sound layered into the next until it became something greater, not a collection of voices, but one vast and endless song. And in that moment he understood. This kingdom was not gone. Not truly, it had simply become the meadow. That night the boy dreamt of the dream-speaking woman. She appeared standing in the meadow beside him, her hair stirring in the same eternal breeze. She tilted her head, listening, though she did not speak. "Do you hear them?" the boy whispered. She nodded. "They are not lost. They are only changed." Her words were like the hum itself, simple, steady, eternal. When he woke, the meadow's voices still wrapped around him. Days passed. He stayed longer than he planned, unable to walk away from the song. Each day he sat in different corners of the meadow, listening to what remained. Sometimes he hummed back, soft, untrained, but true. And each time he did, the meadow seemed to answer, folding his voice into its endless choir. At first, his hum felt small against the weight of thousands. But slowly he realized that was the beauty of it. The meadow welcomed every sound, great or small, without judgment. His single note was enough. He thought of the broken bell tower, whose imperfect sound calmed storms. He thought of the lullabies of the first vanished kingdom. He thought of how even silence could hold a bond unnamed, and he realized the world was stitched together not by power or stone, but by songs. Songs that never ended, only changed shape. One afternoon, while lying in the tall grass, he noticed something. The meadow was shifting. The voices, though endless, grew fainter. Their strength seemed to stretch thin, like a candle guttering at the end of its wick. At first, panic rose in him. He wanted to grasp the sound, to hold it, to keep it from slipping away. But then he remembered the elder's words, remembered the dream woman's calm, remembered the truth of broken things. Everything changes. Everything fades, and yet in fading nothing is truly gone. So instead of clutching, he listened more deeply. The last night he spent there, the meadow sang brighter than ever before. The voices rose in unison, carrying him like waves. Tears blurred his eyes, though he did not know if they were tears of grief or gratitude. And then, slowly, gently, the hum softened. The choir grew fewer, the sound thinner, until at last only a single note lingered in the breeze, then silence. But it was not empty silence. It was full, heavy with memory, a silence that hummed even without sound. The meadow had let go. When dawn came, the boy rose. The meadow looked the same. Grass still swayed, flowers still bloomed. But it was quiet now. The voices had gone where voices go when they have sung their last. He placed his hand on the earth one final time. "Thank you," he whispered. The wind stirred softly, brushing his cheek like a farewell. And though the hum had ended, he knew the song lived on, inside him, inside anyone who ever paused to listen to grass bending, to wind sighing, to silence filled with memory. The meadow had given him its kingdom, and he carried it forward. As he walked away, the boy did not feel sorrow. He felt reverence, because he had learned something truer than any crown. Kingdoms are not stone or throne, but voices, voices that hum through us, linger in us and become us, and even when they fade, their song never ends. The boy's path carried him from the meadow into lands where stone still stood. Unlike the vanished kingdoms, this one had not yet faded. Its walls rose high, though chipped. Its banners hung, though frayed. Voices echoed in its streets, though weariness lingered in each word. The kingdom was alive, but barely. When the people saw him, they murmured as though recognizing something they had long awaited. His face was strange to them, yet familiar, like a memory half remembered in dreams. Children pointed. Elders bowed their heads, and soon whispers rippled, "The one who listens has come." The boy only smiled faintly, saying nothing. He had not come to rule. He had only come to walk, to listen, to rest a while among their walls. But the kingdom had other plans. One evening, as the sun melted low and filled the sky with amber, the boy was summoned into the great hall. It was vast but quiet, its tapestries dulled, its throne empty. The air carried the weight of expectation. There the people gathered. They looked upon him not with suspicion, but with hope sharpened by desperation. An elder stepped forward, robed in pale cloth, his eyes shadowed by years of storms. "We have seen what you carry," the elder said softly. "We have heard of the bell tower you mended, the meadow you honored, the lullabies you keep in your chest. We ask you now, will you take the crown? Will you be our king?" The boy listened. The words rang heavy like stones dropped into still water. He glanced at the throne. It was carved from dark wood, polished smooth by generations. Yet even from a distance he could hear it. an emptiness humming inside, a silence that was not peace but hunger. He closed his eyes and breathed. He let the silence settle into him, felt its edges, its weight. Then quietly he shook his head. The hall stirred. Murmurs rose like wind in leaves. "You refuse?" the elder asked, not angry, only surprised. "I do," the boy said. His voice was calm, steady as water flowing. "I am not meant to sit upon thrones. I am meant to listen." The elder tilted his head, puzzled. And what good is listening if not given shape through rule? The boy met his gaze, gentle but unwavering. "Rule binds. Listening frees. A crown commands only while it is worn. But listening outlives thrones." The elder said nothing more. That night the boy walked alone through the city streets. Lanterns flickered in windows. People whispered of him still, some with disappointment, some with awe. He heard it all, every murmur, every sigh. He listened not to judge, but to hold. And in listening he felt the kingdom itself speak to him, not through words, but through sound. The cobblestones echoed with the footfalls of generations. The wind sighed through alleys, carrying the ache of forgotten laughter. The river beyond the walls hummed with the weight of centuries. The kingdom did not need a king. It needed to be heard. The next day he returned to the great hall. The throne remained empty. The people gathered once more, waiting, uncertain. The boy stood before them, hands open at his sides. "I cannot be your king," he said, voice soft yet clear. "But I can be your witness. Sit with me and tell me your stories. Sing your songs, share your silences. Let us not raise crowns, but let us raise listening." The hall fell quiet. For a moment no one moved. Then slowly, one by one, the people began to sit. Farmers, craftsmen, children, elders. They sat upon the cold stone floor, circling the boy where no throne divided them, and they began to speak. At first their words tumbled with hesitation. A woman spoke of her child lost to storm. A man whispered of hunger. Another told of love found, then faded. A child laughed and said she dreamed of running across the sky. Each story rose into the air and hung there, trembling. The boy listened to every word. He did not interrupt, did not guide, did not command. He simply listened, fully, reverently, as though each sound was sacred. And slowly something shifted. The hall, once hollow, began to feel alive. The emptiness in its rafters filled not with decrees, but with voices. The throne, though empty, no longer seemed hungry. It seemed at rest. Days turned into weeks. The boy remained among the people, not as king, not as ruler, but as listener. He sat in markets, hearing laughter ring between stalls. He sat by rivers, hearing songs carried on boats. He sat beneath trees, hearing silences that spoke louder than words, and the people changed. They began to listen too. They listened to one another's griefs, to one another's joys. They listened to the quiet between words, the hum beneath the world. The kingdom without a king became stronger, not through rule but through listening. One evening, as stars bloomed above, the elder returned to the boy. His eyes were softer now, his voice lighter. "You were right," he whispered. "A crown commands, but listening heals." The boy only nodded. He had no need for praise, no need for thrones. His heart was steady, his path still unwritten. And as he walked away from the hall, past the throne that would remain empty, he felt at peace, because he understood some are born to rule, but he was born to listen. And listening was enough. The kingdom never crowned another ruler after him. Its throne remained vacant, gathering dust, but its people grew strong in other ways, through stories, through songs, through the soft art of listening. Travelers who passed through whispered of a place without a king, yet full of harmony. And some said, if you stood in the great hall long enough, you could hear it, the faint hum of a boy's presence, listening still. The boy had walked through kingdoms vanished into memory, through halls where crowns rusted and thrones ached for voices. He had walked into silence and carried silence with him, not as burden but as gift. He was learning that his powers, strange, unasked for, were not to bend the world into his will but to soften it, to make space for breathing. It was on a night of falling stars that his gift would be tested. The village lay at the edge of the kingdom that had chosen no king, a small place, built of timber and stone where the fields opened wide to the sky. Lanterns glowed softly in the windows, and smoke drifted slow from chimneys. But in one house no light burned. The boy paused as he passed by. He felt something, an ache that pressed against the air like the echo of a bell too recently rung. Grief lived there, quiet but sharp. He stepped to the door and waited. He did not knock. He only listened. From inside came the soft sound of weeping, a child's voice broken by loss. The door opened before he could move. A woman, her eyes hollow, met his gaze. She seemed too weary even to speak. Yet when she saw him, his strange, wandering presence, his quiet eyes, she stepped aside without question. Perhaps she sensed what the others had, that he did not come to take, only to listen. The boy entered. In the corner of the room sat a child, curled in a blanket, clutching a small wooden toy as though it were the last anchor in a drifting world. His cheeks were wet. His breaths were ragged. The boy sat near him, but not too near. He waited. At last the child looked up. "She's gone," he whispered. The boy did not ask who. He did not need to. Loss spoke for itself. The boy reached out his hand, slow, offering, not demanding. The child hesitated, then placed his small palm against it. The touch trembled, fragile as a leaf in autumn wind. "Would you like," the boy asked softly, "for the night to last a little longer?" The child blinked, confused. "Sometimes," the boy said, "we need more time to hold what we love, even if it is only in memory." The child nodded. Desperate and small, and so the boy closed his eyes. It was not easy. His gift was not like lifting stones or lighting fire. It was the weaving of air, the stretching of threads unseen. He took the fabric of the night and drew it long, like pulling a single note on a violin until it trembled with sorrow and beauty. The stars overhead slowed. Their fall became gentle arcs, frozen in the sky like lanterns hung by unseen hands. The moon lingered, refusing to sink. The air thickened with stillness, yet it was not heavy. It was peace. Time softened. Time bent, and within that soft twilight the child's sobs quieted. They sat together as the house filled with silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of being held. The boy spoke little. Instead, he listened as the child whispered stories of the one who was gone, of laughter in the fields, of lullabies sung at dusk, of hands that had once braided his hair. The boy let every word rest in the air unbroken. He gave them weight by his listening. And in that stretched night, grief did not vanish, it never does, but it became gentler. There it loosened its grip. At one moment the child turned to him and asked, "Will she come back?" The boy's heart ached. He had no crown, no power to command life and death. His gift was smaller, quieter. "No," he whispered, "but she is not lost. Every step she took, every song she sang is still here. The air remembers. The river remembers. So even the soil beneath your feet remembers." The child pressed the wooden toy against his chest. "Then will I remember too?" The boy touched the child's hand, steady and warm. "Yes, and when you forget, the world will remind you." Hours passed, or what would have been hours if time had flowed as it should. The boy held the night open, stretching it thin but strong, so that the child might rest in it without fear of the morning. The stars burned like patient witnesses. The crickets outside sang their endless song. The boy felt the strain of holding time, but he did not let go. He thought of his own losses, of the elder who had taught him that broken things still carried meaning, who had drifted away like mist at dawn. He thought of kingdoms that had vanished, leaving only lullabies. He thought of all the voices he had carried in his heart, and he knew grief was not an enemy. It was a companion walking beside love. At last the child's breathing slowed. Sleep came, gentle and deep. His small body softened against the blanket, and his face, though streaked with tears, looked peaceful. The boy released the thread of time. Slowly, carefully, the night resumed its natural rhythm. Stars slid across the sky. The moon dipped lower. The air shifted. But for the child, morning would not arrive too soon. He had been given a gift, one night stretched long enough to breathe, to remember, to rest. The boy rose quietly. The woman still stood near the door, her eyes watching. She had seen the stillness, felt the strangeness in the air. Tears lined her cheeks, but her lips trembled into something close to gratitude. She whispered, "What did you do?" The boy shook his head gently. "I only gave him time. Time to remember, time to rest. That is all." The woman bowed her head. "Then may the world give you the same." The boy smiled faintly, though his eyes carried the ache of his own memories. Then he stepped back into the night. The stars still burned, though paler now. Dawn pressed faintly at the horizon, preparing to rise. The boy walked on, his steps soft, his heart steady. He did not look back, but in his chest he carried the sound of the child's stories, the laughter, the lullabies, the love woven into every memory. And he knew that though grief never ends, neither does love, for both are stitched into the fabric of time, and time, when stretched with care, can hold them both. Travelers who later passed through the village told of a strange night when the stars seemed to hang in the sky. When time slowed, when sorrow softened into silence, they spoke of a wandering boy who did not rule, who did not fight but who listened, and who, for one child's sake, gave the world a longer night. Some said that if you walk those fields at dusk and listen closely, you can still feel it, the hush of time stretched thin, the breath of love refusing to fade. And if you close your eyes, you might hear the boy's voice, soft as the river's current. Grief does not end. Love does not end. Both will walk with you. The boy had walked far since the night he stretched time for the grieving child. Each step carried him deeper into himself, and yet outward too, into a world vast and unending. His gift was no longer strange to him. It was a rhythm of being. But he still did not understand its fullness. He only knew it asked for gentleness, patience, and the quiet bravery of staying. It was the clouds that taught him the rest. The season was late summer. The fields swayed with tall grass, golden and brittle. Cicadas sang in waves that rose and fell like the sea. The boy walked until the earth widened into plains, where the sky was so vast it seemed to swallow everything. Above him, clouds drifted, slow, solemn, unhurried. They were not the wild thunderclouds of storms, nor the thin streaks of winter. These were great billows, soft as sheep, endless as memory. The boy stopped and lay in the grass. He looked up. For hours he simply watched. The clouds moved without effort, without hurry. They were present, filling the sky with their enormous shapes, yet always drifting, changing, never staying the same. He noticed how they carried shadows across the land, long fingers brushing forests, touching rivers, cooling villages. They gave shade, then moved on, never asking to be remembered, never clinging to the places they blessed. He thought of himself. Had he not been doing the same? Moving from kingdom to kingdom, from sorrow to sorrow, offering presents without staying. He had feared this meant he did not belong anywhere. Yet now he wondered if belonging was not the same as drifting. Perhaps it was both. A shepherd passed nearby, her flock scattered across the grass. She noticed the boy lying there, eyes turned skyward. She smiled faintly and sat near him. For a while she too watched the clouds. "They are teachers," she said softly. The boy turned his head. "What do they teach?" She pointed upward. "Patience, letting go. That you can be heavy with water, yet still move lightly. That you can weep and it will only make things grow." The boy listened, his heart stirring. "And what else?" he asked. She tilted her head, thinking. "That you can cover the sun without stealing its fire. That you can drift far and still be part of the sky." The boy closed his eyes. He felt those words seep into him like rain into soil. For days he stayed in the plains watching, sometimes with the shepherd, sometimes alone. He noticed how children pointed at the clouds, turning them into animals and castles and faces. He noticed how old men sat outside their homes, leaning on canes, watching in silence, as though reading an old familiar book. He noticed how the clouds gave no answers, but offered endless space for imagining. The boy began to practice. When grief touched him, memories of his elder, of vanished kingdoms, of the faces he could not keep, he did not fight it. He let the feeling rise, fill him, then drift through him like a cloud across the sky. When joy arrived, sudden laughter, a child's gift of a flower, he did not cling to it. He let it pass too, knowing it was part of a larger weather. The boy was learning balance, to be here yet also passing, to carry weight yet float. One evening storm clouds gathered. They rose high and dark, rumbling with thunder. Villagers rushed to gather animals, close shutters, light lanterns. The shepherd's flock huddled near. The boy stood in the open, watching the sky deepen into shadow. Lightning split the horizon. Rain began to fall, first a patter, then a torrent. The boy lifted his face. He let the water strike him, soak him, wash him. The storm was not anger. It was release. He remembered the shepherd's words, "You can weep and it will only make things grow." The land drank deeply. The fields bent low. The boy felt the storm in his chest, as though his own sorrow was being carried into the sky, poured out freely, without shame. And when the storm passed, The air smelled of newness. The grass glittered with droplets. The shepherd's flock scattered again to graze. The boy felt lighter. That night he dreamt of clouds. They gathered around him in a circle, like elders in council. They spoke not in words but in shifts of shape. One formed into the elder, who had once taught him about broken things, then melted into mist. Another took the shape of the grieving child, then drifted away, leaving only a soft echo of laughter. Another curled into a throne empty, then dissolved into rain. The boy understood. The clouds were showing him what he already knew, that nothing lasts, that nothing needs to last. Presence is enough. He woke with the dawn, the sky clear and endless above him. Before he left the plains, the shepherd met him once more. She handed him a small strip of cloth, dyed sky blue. "Keep this," she said. "When you forget, look at it. Remember the clouds." The boy took it, tied it around his wrist. The cloth fluttered as he moved, a tiny echo of the sky. He bowed to her, gratitude quiet but deep. Then he walked on. As he journeyed, he carried the lesson with him. When villagers asked for help, he listened, gave what he could, then drifted on, never staying longer than needed. When children clung to him, begging him not to go, he knelt and told them softly, "I am like the clouds. I must move. But I was here, and that is enough." Some wept, some understood. But all remembered, and when he walked alone, the boy lifted his eyes to the sky. The clouds were always there, teaching him again, to be here and to move on, to hold weight and to release it, to drift and yet belong. Travelers later spoke of the boy with the sky-blue cloth on his wrist, who seemed as calm as a drifting cloud, who carried storms in his heart, but rained only kindness. They said he was never in one place for long, yet his presence lingered, soft as a shadow passing over the fields. And if you look up at the sky at dusk, when the clouds burn with color and move slow across the horizon, you might feel what the boy learned, that life, like clouds, is not meant to be held still. It is meant to pass through us, beautiful, fleeting, always changing, while we remain part of the same vast sky. The boy's path curved through valleys where rivers whispered, through forests that leaned close as though to share secrets. He carried with him the lessons of clouds, how to be present, how to drift, how to weep without clinging to sorrow. Yet even with these truths resting gently in his heart, the world still held mysteries that pressed upon him like distant thunder. One evening, as the sun folded itself into the horizon and shadows stretched long across the fields, the boy came upon ruins. They rose suddenly from the earth like teeth of stone, pillars cracked and leaning, walls carved with symbols half faded, half swallowed by moss. A great hall stood at the center, broken roof open to the sky where owls perched and ivy clung like an old memory refusing to fade. The boy stepped carefully through the fallen gates. His hand brushed the stone. It was cold but not lifeless. He felt it at once, an echo not of a people but of one figure. A king, not a name, not a face, only a shadow. Inside the hall, moonlight poured through gaps in the broken roof, laying pale silver across the cracked floor. The boy paused. Something stirred. It was not wind. It was not bird or beast. It was presence. A figure shaped itself from the shadows, slow as mist gathering into form. Cloaked in fragments of darkness, crowned with nothing but memory, the shadow of a king rose before him. The boy did not tremble. He only watched. The shadow spoke without voice, its words carried by the stillness of the ruined hall. "Do you remember me?" The boy shook his head gently. "I do not. But the stones do." The shadow shifted, flickering like a candle. "I ruled here once. My name was sung across valleys. My hand weighed upon the world. Yet none remember me now. Not even you." The boy's heart ached. "Forgetting does not erase. You are still here, even if only as shadow." The king's shadow lowered its head. "I built towers that touched the sky. I commanded armies that shook the earth. Yet all I am now is an echo. What was the worth of it?" The boy stepped closer. Perhaps the worth was not in the towers or the armies. Perhaps it was in the laughter you cannot recall, the kindnesses too small to be written in stone. Shadows remain because light touched them once. That is meaning enough. The king's shadow stirred, as though uncertain whether to weep or rage. The hall darkened, the air thick with silence. "Do you not long for power?" the shadow asked. "To carve your name so deep the earth cannot forget it?" The boy shook his head. "Names fade, crowns crumble. I do not wish to be remembered in stone. I wish only to be felt, like the clouds passing gently over the fields. The shadow shivered, shrinking, flickering between form and formlessness. Then you are stronger than I. I held too tightly. I clung to throne and crown, and now I'm neither alive nor gone, only shadow. The boy reached out his hand. His fingers touched nothing, yet the gesture mattered. You are not nothing. You are memory. You are reminder. The shadow lifted its head. The moonlight poured through it, thinning its edges. What shall I do then? It whispered. Drift, the boy said softly. As clouds drift, as rivers carry footsteps. You need not cling to what is gone. You may become part of the sky again. The shadow fell silent. Then, like smoke dissolving into air, it began to fade. Not with violence, not with sorrow, but with a strange kind of peace. Before it vanished entirely, it left behind one last echo. Remember me, not as a king, but as someone who tried. And then it was gone, the hall remained. The boy stood alone, yet not empty. He looked up at the moon through the broken roof, and he whispered, I will remember you. Not your crown, not your armies, only your shadow and the lesson you left. The ruins seemed to breathe lighter somehow, as though relieved of their weight. The owls stirred, their wings soft against the night. The ivy seemed less burdened, the air less heavy. The boy walked out of the hall, his wrist cloth fluttering in the breeze. He carried the shadow with him, but not as burden, only as reminder. That even those who are forgotten were once alive. That even the proudest kings dissolve into echoes. That even shadows can teach. For days afterward, as he walked through forests and fields, he felt the presence of the forgotten king near him. Not haunting, but watching quietly. Grateful to be remembered not in stone, but in heart. The boy would pause sometimes, lifting his gaze to the sky, and he would whisper, I remember you. And in the shapes of drifting clouds, he thought he saw the faint outline of a crown dissolving, soft and free. Travelers later told of a wandering boy who once entered the ruins of a lost kingdom and emerged carrying no treasure, no relic, no crown, only a gentleness in his eyes, as though he had spoken with a king and learned how fragile memory truly is. They said the ruins felt different after he left, less sorrowful, more like a place at peace. And those who dreamt within those walls swore they felt a presence watching, not demanding, not ruling, only lingering, softly repeating, remember me not for what I built, but for what I tried. The boy's journey carried him beyond the ruins where the shadow of the forgotten king had drifted into peace. He walked lighter now, his wrist-bound cloth fluttering like a strip of sky, but his heart still carried the weight of echoes. Not heavy, not crushing, only the kind of weight that reminded him he was part of something larger. He followed a winding path that seemed to draw him toward the mountains. At their base, hidden within a cleft of stone, stood a hall. Its entrance was plain, worn smooth by time, yet as he stepped closer, the air trembled. It was not wind. It was not earth-shifting. It was possibility. The boy entered. Inside, the hall stretched vast and endless, though no torch burned and no sun entered. Its walls shimmered with countless mirrors, each taller than a man, each rimmed in silver that pulsed faintly like veins of light. The mirrors faced inward, row upon row, forming a labyrinth. The boy stepped carefully between them, and as he did, he saw himself, not once, not the same, but 1,000 different selves. One mirror showed him crowned, robes trailing, a king whose voice thundered across kingdoms. Another showed him older, stooped, forgotten, sitting by an empty fire. A third showed him still a boy, forever wandering, never growing. Another showed him as mist, as if he had never been born. Each reflection was not just image, it was life, lived fully in another branch of time. The boy's breath caught. A mirror shimmered before him, showing what might have been if he had chosen the throne when it was once offered. He saw himself seated upon gold, courtiers kneeling, banners raised in his name. He spoke and armies moved. He ruled, and the land bent to his will, but his eyes in the mirror were tired, lonely. The weight of crown pressed into his brow, deeper than any kindness could relieve. The boy reached out, touching the glass. His reflection did not move. It only stared back, weary and silent. He whispered, "That is not the path for me." And he moved on. Another mirror showed him if he had stayed with the grieving child, raising him, becoming his guardian. He saw laughter, years of shared bread, nights of storytelling by the fire. He saw love, belonging, the simple warmth of family. But he also saw the moment the child grew older, restless, and left. He saw the boy-turned man, now aged, sitting alone, waiting for footsteps that never returned. He smiled softly at this vision, bittersweet. "Even love," he murmured, "must drift like clouds." He pressed his hand to the glass in blessing, then stepped away, mirror after mirror, path after path. In one he had become a great teacher, with students gathered at his feet, writing his words into books that filled libraries. Yet he watched as those books grew dusty, their wisdom ignored, their author's name forgotten. In another, he had chosen silence, retreating into the mountains, speaking to no one. He saw himself serene, content, but unseen by all except the wind. In another, he never learned his gift at all. He lived as a farmer, tending soil, never knowing he could stretch time or listen to ruins. And yet, he was smiling, holding a child in his arms, a partner at his side. The boy lingered at this one longest. Happiness was simple there, untouched by destiny. But he whispered, "That was not meant for me. My road is different." The mirrors did not judge. They only showed. Some visions were heavy with sorrow, lives where he failed, where kingdoms crumbled, where he walked alone forever. Others were filled with joy, friendships deep, love abiding, peace found early. But each was only a shadow of a choice not made. The boy felt no fear, only wonder, for he understood now life was not one path or another. It was all of them, existing side by side, each choice a river, each moment a branch. He walked only one, but he carried within him the quiet knowing that every path had value, even those never taken. At the heart of the hall stood the largest mirror of all. It reached from floor to ceiling, vast as the sky. The boy approached. At first it showed nothing. Then slowly an image formed, not of what might have been, but of what was. It showed the boy as he truly was, weary from travel, eyes softened by kindness, wrist bound with a strip of blue cloth. His reflection smiled faintly, as if recognizing him not as possibility, but as reality. The boy stood before it a long while, and then the reflection spoke, not aloud, but in the hush of his heart. "You are enough." Tears welled in his eyes. He had never sought greatness. He had never desired crowns or armies. He had only wanted to walk, to listen, to be present. And now, seeing himself in the mirror, he realized that was enough. All the other lives, all the other selves, each had worth, but so did the one he was living now. The boy bowed to the mirror, not in worship, but in gratitude. When he lifted his head, the mirror dissolved into light. The hall shimmered. One by one, the other mirrors faded, leaving only silence and a faint glow, as if the hall itself had exhaled. The boy turned and walked back into the night. Outside, the sky stretched endless above him. Clouds drifted soft and free. The ruins of the forgotten king lay far behind him, and ahead new roads waited. He touched the strip of cloth at his wrist. It fluttered like a promise. He whispered into the air, to himself, to the shadows, to the mirrors now gone. "I am enough." And the night, filled with stars, seemed to whisper back, "Yes." Travelers who heard of the boy's journey spoke in hushed tones of the Hall of Mirrors hidden in the mountains. They said only those who were ready could find it, and those who entered never left unchanged. Some returned with sorrow, some with peace, some with silence, but all carried with them the same lesson the boy had learned, that life is not one single thread, but a tapestry of what is, what was, and what might have been, and that to walk your own thread gently and with kindness is enough. The boy, though by now he was no longer quite a boy, continued his wandering. Time had brushed its fingers across his brow, leaving faint traces. His hair, once dark as riverstone, now carried threads of silver that gleamed beneath the moonlight. His hands, once quick, were slower, deliberate, as though each movement carried a weight of memory. He still walked the quiet paths of forgotten kingdoms, still listened to ruins and rivers, still carried the strip of cloth tied around his wrist. Yet he moved differently now. Not weaker, but gentler, each step measured, as though he walked not just for himself, but for all the lives he had glimpsed in the mirrors, all the voices that still lingered in the air of abandoned halls. And his voice, oh, his voice had changed. Once it had been filled with the clear curiosity of youth. Then it had grown steady, shaped by lessons and bonds. Now it was softer, not because he lacked strength, but because softness itself had become his strength. When he spoke, people leaned closer. When he whispered, even the wind hushed to listen. The boy, now the man, returned to places he had known long ago. He walked through the ruins where the first bond had been formed, where the elder had taught him that broken things still carried meaning. The stones were colder now, moss grown thick, yet when he placed his palm against them, they still hummed with memory. He bowed, murmuring thanks, and moved on. He passed the meadow where the wandering child had once drawn maps of places that didn't exist. The ground was overgrown, wildflowers spilling in riotous colors, but when he knelt, he found the faintest mark still scratched into a flat stone. Lines and arrows, the hint of a map that had once been drawn by small eager hands. He smiled, tracing it with his fingertip before rising once more. He came to the river that remembered every footstep. Its waters still whispered, carrying echoes of laughter, grief, and song. The man stood at its edge for hours, listening, his eyes wet with tears that were neither sorrow nor joy, but something larger, something that held both. Everywhere he went, he found the past. But it did not weigh him down. Instead, it accompanied him, like a chorus singing softly behind his steps. One evening, he stopped in a small village, where the bell tower he had once helped rebuild still rose, its bells gleaming faintly in the dusk. Children ran barefoot through the square, their laughter bright as birdsong. Old women sat on steps weaving baskets. Men returned from fields tired but smiling. When they saw him, they greeted him warmly. Some remembered his face, though the lines upon it had deepened. Others remembered only the story of the stranger who had once calmed storms with the ringing of bells. They asked him to speak, and he did. But his words were not grand proclamations. They were gentle tales spoken slowly, as though each sentence was a stone placed carefully upon another, building not a wall but a hearth. He told them of rivers that carried memory, of ruins that whispered songs, of clouds that taught him how to drift yet remain present. The children listened with wide eyes. The elders nodded, their faces softened by knowing. And when he finished, silence settled over the square, not empty silence, but silence filled with meaning. The bells rang that night not to calm storms, but to honor the man who had once helped mend them. As years continued, his steps grew slower still. He no longer crossed kingdoms in days. He lingered, sometimes walking no farther than a single village for weeks at a time. He had learned that listening was its own form of journey, that sitting beside a stranger and hearing their story was as vast as crossing mountains. His voice deepened with age, but it remained gentle. Softer now, yes, but in its softness lay power. A single word from him could soothe anger. A single story could ease sorrow. A single whisper could quiet fear. It was said that once, when two villages quarreled over land, he stood between them and spoke not of laws, not of battles, but of rivers and stars, of how all paths eventually meet. His words were no louder than falling leaves, but when he finished, both villages laid down their arms and shared bread instead. The man never called this power. To him it was simply listening, listening so deeply that when he finally spoke, the world recognized its own truth in his words. One night, he found himself beneath an ancient tree, its branches twisted like an elder's hands, its roots sunk deep into the soil of countless seasons. He sat there for hours, perhaps days, speaking softly to the air. He spoke to those he had lost, to the elder who had taught him the worth of broken things, to the wandering child who had drawn maps of impossible lands, to the mentor who had drifted away like mist, to the people of the forgotten kingdom, whose lullabies still lingered in his dreams. He did not ask for their return. He did not beg for more time. He only thanked them. The wind through the leaves answered in hushed tones, and he felt for the first time truly at peace. Travelers who met him in those years carried his memory with reverence. They did not describe him as powerful, nor as kingly, nor as holy. They spoke of him as gentle, as present, as one whose eyes seemed to see both the sorrow and the joy within a person, and loved them all the more for it. Some called him the listener. Others called him the keeper of forgotten songs. Still others simply called him friend, and he accepted all names with the same quiet smile. One day, as dawn broke and painted the sky in pale gold, he sat at the edge of a hill watching the horizon. His hair was white now, his back bent, but his eyes were clear. He knew the road ahead was shorter than the road behind, but he was not afraid. His steps had slowed, his voice had softened, But his journey had never been about speed or volume. It had been about presence, about listening, about walking gently through the world and leaving it softer than he had found it. He touched the strip of cloth around his wrist. After all these years it was frayed, threads loosening, yet it still held. He smiled, whispering, "Still with me." And with that, he rose slowly but steadily and began walking again, his steps slower, his voice softer, but his presence vast, as if he carried not only himself, but all the stories of the world within him. Night had folded itself across the sky like a vast quilt, and the man sat alone beside a dwindling fire. He had been walking all day, his steps slow, the world unhurried. The flames licked upward with tired grace, casting shadows that swayed like dancers who had grown weary yet refused to leave the floor. It was there, in that quiet, that she came to him again, the woman of dreams. He had not seen her in many years, not since the time when his hair was only streaked with silver instead of crowned in white. Yet the moment she appeared, it felt as though not a breath of time had passed. She was as she had always been, her form shimmering slightly, as if she were not entirely bound to the fabric of the waking world. Her eyes held constellations, her voice carried lullabies, and her presence soothed him like the hush that follows a long storm. "Old friend," she said softly, kneeling beside his fire. "You have walked far." He smiled at her words. His lips curved gently, his eyes crinkling. "Far, yes, but never farther than you could follow." She tilted her head, her hair falling like a cascade of shadow and starlight. "You always believed I was following. Sometimes I think you were the one carrying me." He did not argue. With her there was no need for defense, no need for proof. They sat together as they had in years past, the silence between them speaking more than words could. After a while she leaned closer. Her voice was as soft as breath against the skin of the night. "There is something I must tell you," she whispered. He waited. He had learned long ago that her truths were best received without hurry. "You will be forgotten," she said. The words were not cruel. They were not heavy. They were simply true. She spoke them not like a curse, but like a lullaby, an old one worn smooth with the passing of centuries. The man lowered his eyes to the fire. The flames crackled softly, releasing sparks into the dark. For a moment he let the weight of her words settle into him. "Forgotten. I know," he said at last. His voice was steady, almost serene. "Everything is in time." She reached for his hand, her fingers brushing his with a warmth that was not quite physical, yet no less real. "Yes, but not unloved. That is the part I want you to remember. Forgotten, yes, but loved." The firelight flickered across his face, illuminating lines carved by years of walking, years of listening, years of carrying stories, not his own. He nodded slowly. "That feels right," she spoke again, her tone flowing like a stream through still woods. "You have left no statues, no banners, no battles won or lost, no throne that will bear your name." "No," he agreed softly, "but you have left laughter in villages where there was once only silence. You have left calm where there was once only storm. You have left kindness where there was once only sorrow. These things will fade, yes, but their echo will remain. Not in memory, perhaps, not in history, but in the rhythm of life carried forward." He closed his eyes. Her words settled deep within him, like seeds beneath the soil. Forgotten but loved. Her truth larger than his own name, larger than his journey. He thought of the elder who had taught him the worth of broken things. He remembered the wandering child who had mapped worlds that never existed. He remembered the bells he had helped rebuild, ringing peace into storm clouds. He remembered rivers that whispered, clouds that drifted, kingdoms that had vanished, all of them forgotten in their time. Yet when he remembered them, it was not with pain, but with tenderness. He loved them still. And if he could love those who had been forgotten, perhaps others one day would love him the same way, even without his name, even without his story intact. The woman of dreams touched his shoulder. "When your footsteps fade from the river, when the cloth at your wrist frays into nothing, when no one speaks your name, still you will be loved. That is the way of things. To be forgotten is not the same as to be lost." Tears slipped down his cheeks. Not of fear, not of sorrow, tears that came like rain on parched earth, softening something inside him that had grown tight. "Then I'm ready," he whispered. The fire dwindled further, collapsing into glowing embers. Around them, the night stretched vast and endless, stars blinking like old companions who never quite left. She sang then, a quiet melody without words. He had heard it before, years ago, in another forgotten kingdom. It was the sound of waves lapping against an unseen shore, the sound of wind breathing across meadows, the sound of a mother humming to her child. He leaned back, eyes half closed, and let the song carry him. For the first time in many years, he felt no need to move forward, no need to listen, no need to gather stories. For this moment, being still was enough. And beside him she remained, not fully here, not fully gone, a dream tethered lightly to his reality. When dawn finally crept across the horizon, painting the world in hushed gold, she began to fade. He stirred, opening his eyes to see her outline thinning, her form dissolving into mist and light. "Will I see you again?" he asked. His voice was not desperate, only curious, as one might ask the weather whether rain will fall tomorrow. Her smile lingered, even as her shape dissolved. "Perhaps, or perhaps you will only dream of me. But does it matter? The dream and I are not so different." He nodded, accepting. He had learned long ago that clinging too tightly to things, people, moments, even dreams, was a way of losing them faster. Better to let them drift as clouds do, better to love them as they passed without demand that they stay, and then she was gone, leaving only the fire's final smoke curling upward into the dawn. The man sat in silence, the words she had left him echoing like a bell rung long after the sound had faded. Forgotten but loved. He looked down at his hands, at the strip of cloth frayed but still clinging to his wrist. He touched it gently. "When this too falls away," he murmured, "I will not be afraid." His voice was soft, his breath steady. The world felt vast around him, but for once he did not feel small within it. Instead, he felt woven into it, one thread among countless others, a thread that might one day be hidden but never lost. For in the great fabric of things, even threads unseen hold the pattern together. That night, as he lay beneath the stars once more, he whispered to no one in particular, "If I am forgotten, let it be so. If I am loved, let that be enough." And in the silence that followed, the wind seemed to answer. The man wandered farther than he had in many years, though his pace was slow, his steps deliberate. He no longer sought discovery. He walked to remember. For the kingdoms of his youth, those he had known, those he had helped, those he had only passed through, were vanishing, slipping quietly into silence. It did not happen with fire or battle. No trumpets, no smoke, no grand collapse. Instead, the endings came gently, like the dimming of a candle. Villages that once brimmed with laughter grew still. Towers leaned, then crumbled without fanfare. Gardens bloomed one last time, then gave themselves over to wild grass and moss. He would come upon a settlement he had known, expecting to hear bells or children, and find only wind. Sometimes a door swung on its hinges, as though the house had simply exhaled and gone to sleep. The world was becoming quieter, and yet, within that quiet, he found something else: lullabies. One evening, as dusk folded over a meadow, he paused near the remains of what had once been a village square. The stones of the fountain were cracked, its basin dry, but when he leaned close, he thought he heard a faint hum. It was not the sound of water. It was the sound of song, children's voices, faint and tender, carrying notes of a melody he could not quite place. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he was back among them, watching the little ones chase one another barefoot through the grass, hearing mothers hum while cradling infants, seeing old men tap their feet to rhythms passed down through generations. When he opened his eyes, the square was empty. Only crickets sang. But the lullaby lingered, carried in the air as though the stones themselves remembered. He whispered softly, "You are not gone." Not really. As weeks turned into months, he began to notice the pattern. Every kingdom that vanished left behind not ruins alone, but music. Sometimes in stones, sometimes in rivers, sometimes in the hush of the wind against tall grass. In one forest he heard voices hidden in the rustle of leaves. They sang of journeys home, of lanterns in windows waiting to be lit. In another, along the banks of a dry riverbed, he heard laughter woven into the silence, the echo of children once playing in shallow streams. And in a mountain pass, beneath the shadow of cliffs where a fortress once stood, he heard a low, steady hum, deep as earth itself, the lullaby of the strong, who had kept watch over their people until the very end. Each song was different. Yet each carried the same tenderness. None were shouts. None were cries. They were all soft, as if the world itself wished to soothe whoever came after, whispering, "You are safe here. You are loved even if you are alone." The man began to collect them. Not in words, not in writing, but in his heart. He would sit for hours in silence, listening, breathing slowly so as not to disturb the faint melodies. He did not try to sing them himself. He knew they were not his to keep that way. Instead, he remembered them, carrying them as one might carry seeds in a pocket. Sometimes, when he came across travelers, he would share what he had heard. A family by the roadside, weary from their journey, would fall quiet as he hummed a tune he had once heard in the ruins of a forgotten kingdom. The children's eyes would soften, their mother's shoulders ease. "What is that song?" they would ask. He would smile gently. "An old lullaby, from a place that is no longer here, but perhaps it can live here now with you." And he would leave, knowing the melody would continue, changed yet enduring. One night, he sat beside a river whose waters gleamed like silver under the moonlight. The river itself still flowed, but the town that had once lined its banks was gone. Only stones remained, slick with moss. He listened, and a lullaby rose from the current. It was a song of farewell, soft and unhurried, like parents tucking children into bed. He felt tears on his cheeks, not for the loss but for the love still carried forward. Forgotten, yes, but loved. The words of the woman of dreams returned to him, echoing now more clearly than ever. This was what she had meant. Nothing lasts but love leaves traces, not always seen, not always remembered, but felt, like lullabies hummed in places where no voices remain. He began to notice his own voice joining the songs, though only in whispers. When he walked through a meadow, he hummed gently, his tone weaving with the wind. When he stood in a crumbling hall, he sang softly, letting the sound bounce against stone that had not heard voices in centuries. He did not sing to be heard. He sang to honor, to remind the silence that it was not empty, and sometimes, just sometimes, he thought he heard the world answer back. As the kingdoms vanished one by one, he did not feel despair. Instead, he felt awe. He realized now that endings were not erasures. They were transformations. A kingdom might vanish, but its essence shifted, softened, turned into song. He too would vanish one day. His footsteps would fade from the river. His name would slip from memory. His body would rest beneath soil or stone, but perhaps his kindness, his listening, his quiet presence would drift onward as a lullaby does, carried not by his own voice, but by the air, by those who remembered the feeling of being near him, even if they forgot his name. He whispered into the night, "Let me too become a song." That night, as he closed his eyes, he dreamed. He dreamed of all the vanished kingdoms gathering together. The elder was there, holding broken things that glowed faintly in the dark. The wandering child unfolded maps of lands that were not real, yet somehow were. The mentor drifted in like mist, smiling faintly. The people of forgotten villages sang softly, their voices blending into a chorus that stretched across the horizon. And in the center of them all, the woman of dreams stood, her eyes tender. She did not speak this time. She only hummed. The man felt the sound surround him, seep into him until he was not separate from it, until he was part of it. When he awoke, the melody lingered, as real as the morning breeze. From then on, he walked not only as a listener, but as a singer of echoes. Wherever he went, he carried lullabies in his breath, sharing them gently, leaving them in places where silence had grown too heavy. He no longer worried about vanishing. He understood now that vanishing was not an ending. It was simply becoming part of a song too vast to hold in any one memory. And as he walked, kingdoms continued to fade, but their lullabies rose higher, softer, filling the world with a music that could never be lost. The man had grown old. His hair, once dark, then silver, was now as white as morning frost. His back bent slightly when he walked, but his steps remained steady, carrying him across meadows, along rivers, and into the shadows of forgotten ruins. He no longer sought new places. Instead, he returned to the memories that lived within him, revisiting them the way one might revisit a familiar song. His life, he realized, was not measured in crowns or victories, but in the faces of those he had loved, the voices that had walked beside him, and the quiet nights when the stars had been his only companions. He thought first of the elder. The man remembered how the elder had taken his small, uncertain hands, and taught him that broken things could still carry meaning. He recalled the warmth of that voice, patient yet steady, like a bell that never cracked no matter how often it rang. When he closed his eyes, he could still see the elder's workbench, covered in splinters of wood and fragments of clay pots, each piece mended with care. The elder's lesson had never been about fixing objects. It had been about honoring what remained, and about seeing worth where others saw waste. That lesson had never left him. Even now, when his own body felt fragile, when his voice trembled with age, he remembered, broken did not mean useless. Broken could still mean beloved. Then he thought of the wandering child, how small and eager they had been, carrying chalk and charcoal to scrawl maps of lands that never existed. The man smiled faintly, remembering how seriously the child had explained rivers that flowed uphill, mountains that floated, forests where the trees whispered secrets to one another. Most had laughed at the child's impossible maps, but the boy who became the man had not. He had sat and listened, tracing the lines with his finger, as though each impossible place might someday be real. Now, in his old age, he wondered if perhaps they were real. Perhaps the child had seen something others could not. And even if the maps were only imagination, they had given him a gift, the understanding that belief, even in what cannot be seen, is its own kind of truth. He remembered his mentor, too, the one who had drifted away like morning mist. Their bond had not been long, but it had been deep. The mentor had offered guidance not in the form of commands, but in quiet nudges, in questions that lingered until the boy found his own answers. The day the mentor left, the boy had felt hollow. But years later he understood. Sometimes those we love must step away, leaving us with silence so that we may learn to fill it ourselves. Loss had not been the end of love. The bond remained, reshaped, softer but still strong. Even now the man felt the mentor's presence whenever he stood before a crossroads. He remembered the woman of dreams, her eyes filled with constellations, her voice filled with lullabies. She had come to him not in the way ordinary people came, but in the way dreams arrive, sudden, soft, ungraspable, and yet unforgettable. She had whispered truths to him that no one else dared say, that he would be forgotten, but loved. And in the years since he had found her words to be true. Already villages no longer remembered his name. Already songs he had hummed were credited to no one at all. And yet he felt no sorrow in this. He felt only gratitude. For her presence, for her tender honesty that had carried him into acceptance. The man sat by a fire one evening, the stars above so thick it seemed as though the heavens had spilled salt across black velvet. The night was still. Only the faint crackle of flame and the faraway cry of a night bird stirred the silence, and he remembered the smallest moments, a child pressing a flower into his hand after he calmed their fear with a story. An old woman sharing half her bread with him, though she had little enough for herself. The laughter of strangers when he joined them in a simple game of stones and circles. The warmth of a dog who curled against his side one cold night. Asking nothing but presence. It was these moments, not kingdoms, not crowns, that had filled his life with meaning. He thought, too, of the stars themselves. How many nights had he lain beneath them, letting their steady glow ease him into sleep? They had been companions constant and unwavering. They never demanded. They never left. They simply shone, distant yet present, patient as eternity. Sometimes when he stared long enough, he thought he saw patterns among them, shapes that reminded him of the elder. The child, the mentor, the woman of dreams. Constellations not written in books but etched in memory. The stars reminded him of what he had learned from clouds long ago, to be both present and drifting, to glow even from far away, to belong without possession. As he grew older still, his steps slowed to the pace of memory itself. He could walk no longer from village to village. Instead, he lingered beneath trees by rivers, in meadows where the grass swayed like lullabies, and in those still places he did not feel alone. His friendships, his kindnesses, his nights beneath the stars, they lived on inside him, each one a small flame. He did not need to be remembered in history. He was remembered in himself and in the quiet echoes he had left with others. One evening, as twilight deepened, he spoke aloud, though no one was near. "I have walked long enough. I have seen enough. And what remains is simple. love, kindness, and the stars. The wind stirred gently as if to agree, and so in those final years, the man no longer measured his life by time. He measured it by memory, by friendships that had shaped him, by small kindnesses that had warmed him, by quiet nights that had wrapped him in peace, all of it fragile, all of it fleeting, all of it enough. The years had folded into one another, like pages turning slowly in a book. Where once there had been noise, villages bustling, children laughing, rivers roaring, bells ringing, now there was stillness. Time had carried him to the threshold of the last kingdom, a place where silence reigned not through conquest, nor through despair, but through gentle fading. As though the world itself were growing tired and ready to sleep, the man walked alone through its streets. They were not broken. The stones of the roads remained smooth. The houses still stood, their doors unbroken, their windows unshattered. Yet no voices filled the air. No footsteps echoed. The people had vanished, not violently, not tragically, but softly, as if carried away by a dream they had chosen not to return from. He paused at a fountain in the square. The water still flowed, but no one came to draw from it. He touched its surface with his fingers and felt the coolness run along his skin. He thought of the river that remembered every footstep and wondered if this fountain remembered every hand that had reached into it. Perhaps it did. Perhaps memory was not always tied to people. Perhaps stone and water remembered too. He moved on. In the center of the kingdom rose a bell tower. He remembered once helping to rebuild such a tower, lifting shattered beams, polishing the bronze and ringing the bell until storms themselves bent their heads in calm. But this tower was different. Its bell hung in silence. No rope waited to be pulled. The metal no longer gleamed, and yet standing beneath it he felt no sorrow. Instead he felt the deep hush of completion, the way a song lingers even after the last note has faded. He whispered to himself, even silence is a kind of sound. The streets wound on, and as he wandered them, he remembered his journey. He thought of his first bond, of broken things that still carried meaning. He thought of the wandering child and their impossible maps. He thought of his mentor, who had left him with questions instead of answers. He thought of the woman of dreams, who had promised him he would be forgotten but loved. He thought of nights beneath stars and clouds that had taught him to be present and drifting. Each memory was a companion now. They did not fade as the people had. They stayed with him, whispering in his chest, filling the silence with echoes. At last he reached the gates of the last kingdom. Beyond them stretched open land, vast and quiet, where grasses moved like oceans in the wind. He stepped out and turned to look back one final time. The kingdom stood motionless, like a painting without voices, like a dream paused mid-breath. And he, an old man leaning on his staff, smiled, not a smile of triumph, not a smile of regret, but the soft smile of one who has seen enough and understood enough to know that endings are not enemies. He whispered, "It is well." Night fell. He lay down beneath the stars, as he had done so many times before. His body ached, but his heart did not. He felt the ground cradle him, the grass brush gently against his skin, the cool night air press against his face like a blessing. Above, the constellations wheeled slowly. He thought he saw familiar shapes. The elder bent over his workbench, the child with chalk-stained hands, the mentor fading like mist, the woman of dreams with her constellations in her eyes. Even the clouds he had once learned from seemed to drift among the stars, reminding him to be here yet free. The silence deepened. But he no longer thought of it as emptiness. It was not absence. It was fullness. A silence heavy with memory, with kindness, with all the laughter and tears that had once been. And then the man closed his eyes. He did not fear being forgotten. For he understood now. Being forgotten did not erase what had been. Every kindness, every friendship, every quiet night beneath the stars remained part of the world, woven into rivers, into trees, into the very silence itself. He drifted, gently the way his mentor once had, the way the people of the last kingdom had, the way clouds drift endlessly. His breath slowed, his heart softened, his body eased, and in that final moment he smiled, knowing silence too was a song. The night went on. The stars kept their watch. The grass swayed. The world neither mourned nor celebrated. It simply was, and within that vast stillness, the story of the boy who dreamed in echoes became what it was always meant to be. Not an epic to be sung forever, but a quiet lullaby carried briefly on the wind, then given back to silence,